We're live, so good morning, everyone. It's May 16th, 2026, with another edition of the Saturday Free School for Philosophy and Black Liberation. We are going to continue the exciting conversation from last week and bring it to what I think is, we're getting closer and closer to the eye of the storm. And this week we're going to build on ideas put on the table last week, which I think are unresolved, but we're going to try to approach it from a new direction. And so this Saturday, we're going to discuss Martin Luther King Jr. And discuss specifically from civil rights to human rights to revolution, and what King and his formulation and this discussion, what it means for this time of struggle. So I think we'll first start with Kathy and Alice will report back from, we've been reading the first of 3 volumes of Taylor Branch's, what I call a biography of the civil rights decade. It's probably perhaps the most comprehensive and detailed historical work on the civil rights movement. And all the different people, the different campaigns. So they'll report specifically on Birmingham, the significance of Birmingham for today. And then after Kathy and Alice share a bit about Birmingham, then I will talk about the last 2 years of King's life and what I think, based upon key speeches that King gives at the SCLC planning meetings and conventions, what King was trying to work out at the end of his life, especially in thinking about the future direction of the civil rights decade, the Black freedom movement for the future. And then finally, Doc will synthesize.
I don't know about that, but I'll try to say.
No, you naturally do. Doc will naturally, organically synthesize a lot of what we are putting on the table, and talking specifically about the urgent task of today. The times today, what they are ripe for, but also what is needed from anyone who considers themselves revolutionaries. So Doc will kind of add in, has prepared something, and I think we'll have a very fruitful conversation about what the civil rights decade, what the Black freedom movement, and what King was trying to resolve, but was unable to resolve because he was assassinated. What we are inheriting for today in these times, when so much is possible, yet there are also great challenges and great crises confronting the American people. So that's Free School for today, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. So without further ado, oh, sorry, I forgot. Yes, and as an extra bonus treat, Doc is actually wants to first talk about this pretty magnificent opera that was put on at the Opera of Philadelphia. Some of us went to it last night as part of the Brothers Network. I really suggest, if you can, just checking it out, because it has a lot to do with some of the ideas that we in Free School take very seriously, but it's an artist trying to perform some of these ideas. And so Doc's gonna report on it, but it's called The Black Clown. It's an adaptation of the Langston Hughes poem, The Black Clown. And it was written and adapted and produced and performed, the main character performed by Devon Tynes, who is a really interesting person. He's a pretty prominent artist now. His singing, he self-proclaims, is inspired by Paul Robeson in particular, and he went to Harvard for sociology, and I think he's an artist now. But we saw it last night, and it's just very technically, there's clearly a lot of money behind it, but just really great talent, really striking, interesting visuals, dance, performance, choreography, singing. But Doc wants to provide kind of an ideological
just
recap.
Some thoughts,
Yeah.
And where is this?
The Miller Theater.
The Miller Theater.
It's next to the Academy of Music.
Oh,
On
okay.
Broad Street, yeah.
Okay.
And there's a lot going on in Philadelphia in terms of opera that you don't know about. And this is I guess you could say, a modern American opera. And as Emily said, the talent is off the hook. Unbelievable talent, including the co-creator who sang literally throughout the entire performance. He was singing, and he has this magnificent baritone, not a Paul Robeson in basso, what we call basso profundo. It's a baritone, and he was performing even some vocal gymnastics that were very impressive for me. And there was an ensemble. He was the key figure, but then there was an ensemble cast of singers and dancers. The people who were dancing were also singing. And they were doing some really extraordinary things in kind of like a choir. Just a lot of different chords and scales that were very, very interesting. And I just was amazed at how competent they were as singers. But as Emily said, there's a lot of money behind this production, and it is designed for Broadway, and it will certainly be on Broadway. And you know, Kathy, tell me if you heard this too. A lot of Ellington, a lot of Duke Ellington, and a lot of Alvin Ailey. You know, the spacing, the movement, and even at one point they used the trope of the parasol. You know, so it was. You know, I was identifying with that. And I should tell you, like Emily said, there was a pre-play event where a young man read the poem, and it is an impressive poem. Not quite an epic poem, you know, like Baldwin's, what's that poem?
Staggerly Wonder?
Staggerly, yeah. It's not that, but in substance it is that. And the trope of the black clown, I think that is a very important thing for Hughes. The poem is written in 1931. By this time, Langston Hughes is a committed revolutionary. He had gone through the 20s, his debates with Du Bois over the commitment and function of the artist. He'd gone through the Harlem Renaissance, in other words, and all of those great thinkers and artists. And so now he's in 1931, and of course, to understand what he's doing, you have to understand the defeat of Reconstruction. That seems to have gotten lost in the discussion before the play and in the play itself. I was Alice. I was sitting next to Alice, and she wanted me to clap. It's not that I didn't want to clap. I did want to clap because I was very impressed, and then I was shamed into clapping. Not just by Alice, but by the brothers in back of me. Do that now. Oh, that kind of, black talk. Y'all got that, So I was, in fact, I met the guy afterwards. I said, thank you for your encouragement. Thank you for your service. But it was kind of that. But I was just so engrossed by the politics of it.
Yeah.
And then I recognized certain things that were going on. Besides the Ellington and Ailey, big, it's huge in that. You hear Ellington all over it. But it is the vaudeville tradition. In fact, the Jewish vaudevillians, which would be finally popularized on the stage and in Hollywood movies, with actually, I remember two major movies and plays. One is Cabaret, and the other is The Producers. and they both deal, well, the cabaret deals with the Jewish actor performer in pre-Nazi Germany. And if you look at that movie, you can see how this is being framed, this play is being framed. It is, and then the other one is The Producer. Both draw upon, what they used to call Tin Pan Alley or Jewish vaudevillian tradition. The vaudeville, that's why, if you remember the part where they're talking about the end of slavery, and they're not dressed as slaves, they're dressed in kind of modern costumes that they will kind of wear throughout the play, and that whole kind of, how would you put it, looking to the theater of the absurd, the theater of sarcasm, where Jews in the concentration camp are playing music and such, or Jews in cabaret are in the cabaret waiting for the worst to happen. Now, these plays and movies have a darker, I think more realistic approach, but it is this vaudeville. Vaudeville is not the same as the minstrel, although there's certain commonalities. Minstrelsy was not in the play. It wasn't there. The minstrel is an important figure closer to Langston Hughes' clown, But the choice that was made artistically, and this all has to do with money, cost of production, and then the audience that you want to enjoy this, and audiences will enjoy it. There's no way you don't enjoy it, it's just that good. But let's separate great art from great entertainment. I think here we saw great entertainment with artistic, with art in it, but it is not great art because great art would leave the audience at another level of consciousness or with questions. The other thing is, this is not the art of the Harlem Renaissance or the Black Arts Movement. For example, in the Black Arts Movement, drama was a big part. And, two of the people that I recall most are Miri Baraka. He had two kind of one-act off-Broadway plays, The Slave and the other called The Dutchman, where they turned out being dialogues on racism, and then James Baldwin's play that did make it to Broadway, Blues for Mr. Charlie, which was only there for a couple of weeks and boom, and, But the other, by the way, I don't know why I forgot it, is, what's her name?
Lorraine.
Yeah,
Lorraine?
Lorraine Hansberry, yeah.
A Raisin in the Sun.
A Raisin in the Sun. And, well, none of these are musicals, None of them are in the vaudevillian tradition. And then, then you get the other, I just mentioned it, Endazaki Shange's For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide. But that is a little later. It's not in the Black Arts Movement tradition, I don't think, but maybe it is. But I just say all of that to say that I went home I was trying to figure it out. What was I seeing? What the hell was I seeing? I know I could, what was obvious, the great performances. And really, I was so impressed with the lead character, that baritone voice, and what he was able to do with that voice. And so I said, well, there were a lot of songs and there was a lot of dancing, not enough dialogue. If you look at the play or the movie Cabaret or the producers, there's enough dialogue to anchor the music. There was not enough dialogue. And when I saw that, I then knew that most of this would be a distraction. That great music, great performance, but it was so removed from the poem. The clown exists throughout all cultures. Sometimes it's called the signifying monkey, as in Nigeria. But the clown is a tragic comic figure. Now, it's hard enough to get tragedy, but to get tragic comic requires so much more. And then I'll stop here. And the way they ended was just a complete collapse. And that let me know that it's for an audience that wants to be entertained and not elevated in their consciousness. So I ended up like, oh, did I tell you, I ran into a friend, did I mention that?
You should say it.
Yeah, I ran into a friend on my way there. And he had danced with Ailey, he had danced with Philadanko, he had a hell of a dance career. So he knows dance, he knows art. So I told him I was going to the play. It just happened while I was waiting for the bus. And he said, yeah, I saw it last night. And he said, and he didn't want to, nobody really likes to be too critical because you got all these young performers and they're so great, so you don't want to, feel like you're poo-pooing anything. But he said, I didn't like it. And he said, call me after you see it and tell me what you think. And I called him last night, but it was too late. I guess he didn't pick up. But if you would have asked me, I was thinking also this morning, what would Baldwin say about it? I think his, just to be polite, his first public response would be to praise it. But I think in 6 or 7 months he would have been critical, especially dealing with such a very important question, the defeat of Reconstruction, and the other thing, this aspect of dehumanization, and that's in the poem. You have taken from me my humanity. You have done it. That's not in the play. That's nowhere near. So I would just end with that. I think this relates very much to what we're going to talk about this morning.
Any conjecture as to where the money behind this came from?
Where money for these types of ventures come from. Billionaires, people who produce Hollywood movies and Broadway plays.
Well, I guess with that, we'll get started with,
Yes.
or move on to the other components that we wanted to discuss today. Kathy and I were planning to talk about Birmingham, and I think this is connected to previous conversations we've had. And one thing that Reverend James Lawson had noted was that Birmingham was that strategic turning point, where the Black freedom struggle becomes a revolutionary movement. And so part of the impetus is to pick up from there, but I think there are also broader things that we're trying to understand. And I feel sort of nervous because I think to understand Birmingham, which takes place April 1963 to May of 1963, is a monumental task because there are so many components to it. And I think part of it is that I'm nervous about understanding its relevance today, and then also to understand all the different intricate pieces that Birmingham had represented. But hopefully Kathy and I can both cover it, and then also with conversation with everyone, that we'll be able to make sense of what happened for Birmingham, what happened in Birmingham, and then its relevance for today. I think for relevance of today is, as I was trying to make sense of it, is like the question of why are we even studying the civil rights movement or the Black freedom struggle? Or why is it that we call this period in American history the Third American Revolution? And the reason why that's important is because we're not just studying this period as historical facts or to know something just for the sake of knowing, but I think we're trying to study this period because we as revolutionaries in free school are trying to understand what is a strategy and a plan for actually creating change in American society in a time of tensions between people that we've talked about in previous free schools, in a time where there is a state that is at war with the world, but also is losing its grip of the American people. Like, how do us revolutionaries in all of these, or amidst these circumstances, figure out a way forward for the American people towards a more just society, towards freedom? And I think that's the reason why we're studying a period in American history that is unique to, that has shaped the American people, where even today there are remnants of that period, and meets the American situation where people are making sense of relations between Black and whites and immigrants and so forth. And the other part is that it's unique to American history, but also that with this history, it helps to formulate a strategy in which makes sense for America and makes sense for the American people. So that's sort of why I think Birmingham, or the study of the Third American Revolution, but also specifically Birmingham, is important. I think Birmingham is, I think just even to ground Birmingham, this is about 8 years since the start of the Montgomery bus boycotts. And I say 8 years because 8 years is not a long time when you look back in history, but it's also a long time when you're in that moment trying to figure out and understand what is happening and what is the path forward. Like the free school, and that's also something to say, which is over a period of time, there will be losses, there will be wins, and there will also be points in the movement where there is a lot of hope and high morale among the people. But among those 8 years, there's also times where there is a feeling of, can we keep going? And how do you build actually a movement among the people? And that happens within those period of 8 years. There's the rise of the Montgomery bus boycotts, but then afterwards there's this question of, where do we go from here? What's the next step? And I think that's very similar to, or that's always a question even for today, which is, how do you sustain a movement? How do you understand where the people are at and where they can go based on where people are at? And so there's the Montgomery bus boycotts that were in 1955, 1956. Thereafter, there were the student direct action campaigns, such as with Lawson and the Nashville students, sit-ins, the freedom rides. And that's where the movement is still the movement is still ongoing, and they're trying to figure out what is that next point. There was a Albany movement as well as part of that even King and others had assessed as a step back, where they didn't make the gains that they had hoped for. And from that, taking the learnings of what happened in Albany to then making a push in Birmingham of we have a setback, but now it's our moment to then regain ground. And so I think also just general context is the relationship between the leadership of the movement, the people, but also with administration and what's happening in the world in this period, where in the 1960s, this is the anti-colonial movement, this is the Cold War, this is a time when America is on the ascendancy, and they are trying to communicate to the world that we're a democratic nation, that we're this great nation that is equal and free, and we're standing up against totalitarianism and authoritarianism. And so Birmingham, I think starting with Birmingham, there is, for Birmingham, the reason why they had chosen, or the movement had chosen Birmingham, is that it was one of the most segregated places in America. And the Alabama Christian Human Rights Organization, which the SCLC that King is a part of, has a relationship with the various organizations, including this Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights. And so at that period, there are conversations essentially among Black leaders of essentially strategizing where is next. And so that's how King and the SCLC is brought into Birmingham to strategize. And so with that, you have figures, there's this revolutionary core that forms. And this revolutionary core meaning, with King as the leader, there are also other individuals that take part in the planning of, okay, what is going to be the project in Birmingham? And this is also really interesting because you think of Birmingham, you think of Montgomery, you think of the Freedom Rides, and they become these massive movements, but really it starts with a group of individuals who are planning and thinking along with the people. And so this revolutionary core that's planning Birmingham really only consisted of 11 individuals. There was King, there was Fred Shuttlesworth, there was Abernathy, Dorothy Cotton, Stanley Levinson, James Lawson, among others. So it's this small group that is figuring out what is going to be that path. And at this time, I don't think Bevel was, because Bevel was in Greenwood at this time.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Because in parallel, because there's this Birmingham movement, but then there's also the voter education project that they're carrying out in Greenwood. And so this is kind of important. This is important because there's also the dynamics within the Black organizations, where you have SNCC, where you have CORE, where you have the SCLC, so forth, that are figuring out what are the different kinds of what are the projects, but then also what are the focal points of the movement. And Birmingham is also interesting because the NAACP had been outlawed in Alabama. SNCC also didn't have a project going on in Birmingham. They were involved in the Greenwood projects. And so, but then Bevel essentially later comes on as the movement is building in Birmingham. So what's really fascinating with the Revolutionary Corps is that with this Revolutionary Corps, you see how much planning and preparation goes into it, where it's not this just uprising of different forces, but there's actually a planning process of where are they going to get the funds, for example, for the bail bonds if people are arrested. And that was one of the failures of the Albany movement. The funds had dried up. There was no way to be responsible to the people, where you can't just think about people going into jail, but you also have to think of a way to get them out of jail as well. And so with that, it's interesting because King speaks to, there's a couple of different components that King had spoken of, like what is a nonviolent campaign? What are the different steps? And not always sequential. But one he was saying is a collection of facts, which is to determine if there is injustice at this place. And Birmingham obviously became one of those centers where there's a history of bombings in the city. Someone like Fred Shuttlesworth, his house was bombed, his church was bombed several times, so forth. The courts were unfair for Black folk. And there's just violence as well against Black people in the city. And so this collection phase. Then there's this period where King is saying is negotiations. Negotiations with the authorities of these are the demands that we have, and concrete demands, and to follow through with those demands, because the movement is also aware that without sustained pressure, the administration essentially responds to a period where there is this movement and there is this coverage and national attention. But then over that hump, the administration kind of doesn't fulfill its unfulfilled promises, so forth. And so that's the importance of a mass uprising of the people, where the people are putting pressure on the states. And this is also important because with Birmingham, there's also lessons from the Kennedy administration and the various states and local administrations, where they're saying, okay, in the Montgomery bus boycotts or in the freedom rides, so forth, maybe we put too much attention to, or we gave King and the movement too much attention. Maybe what our tactic or strategy or what our strategy will be is to just ignore it, not to engage with it and just to let it die out. And that was what was happening in Birmingham, where JFK, the administration, was like, okay, this is a local matter. We have more important things, world matters to deal with, such as the Cuban Missile Crisis, so forth. And so part of Birmingham was also to get national attention, and the administration also to be part of the discussion. And it's not just a engagement with Bull Connor and the state of Alabama. But what's interesting about negotiation for Birmingham is that this is also the period that King is writes letter from a Birmingham jail. And a lot of letter from Birmingham jail is that there are Black leaders that are saying, okay, there's a new administration coming in because Bull Connor was running for mayor. And then there's another guy, oh God, I'm forgetting his name.
Bothwell.
Yes, who's running. And
Who actually won.
who won. And so the city was saying like, oh, or Black leaders and white moderates were essentially saying that the movement is creating chaos. The movement, like the city's already going in the good direction. You know, you have a new administration. Birmingham's going to be a less racist place. Why are you creating this quote unquote unnecessary tension in the city?
Right.
And we should just be negotiating. And things will improve. But King is saying that no, like that's why he writes a letter from a Birmingham jail, that it's not the KKK that I'm most worried about. It's actually those that say they agree with our goals, but tell us to wait, or tell us to trust that those on the other side of the table will advance progress without the people actually pressing and holding them accountable. And so that's why he's saying we do want negotiations, but that history has told us that negotiations alone don't work, because both sides, or the other side, is not always acting in good faith. And so that's why the other two components that King speaks to is self-purification, what he calls or I don't know if actually he calls it or if Taylor Branch calls it, self-purification and direct action, where for self-purification, or self-purification or nonviolence, which is that our strategy will not be to engage with authorities in violent confrontation where things only escalate. But there's not a path forward of actual change. And so he's saying that only really if for these movements, what we're asking for is the most disciplined, trained, and individuals who are willing to sacrifice for nonviolence and return, willing to sacrifice to be part of the movement. And this direct action comes across as like sit-ins, the marches, protests, so forth. And it's interesting because I think for our time, there are lessons too, which is when we talk about strategy, what do we mean by strategy? And it does mean what King is saying of an assessment of what is happening. Like the fact that they even planned the Birmingham movement and the timing around Easter or following the mayoral elections is to say we don't want this to be used by Bull Connor in his campaign so that he wins, but then let's wait till afterwards. But then not wait too long where the movement, because it's also a conversation among the leaders of, okay, maybe we should push it off again, so forth. And so I say this because it's really impressive. I don't know if I'm communicating just the amount of thinking and assessment and preparation that had gone into Birmingham. But
Hey, Alex, could I just say one
Yeah,
small thing on that? The question of timing was very important with, I think maybe it was a consensus view that we should hold off because Easter is coming and we will lose black people. So you are disrupting our Easter celebrations with people buy new clothes to wear to church and so on. So they were trying, as well as, and I think you're right, the election was still being contested. I mean, because it seemed that Bodwell had won, but Bull Connor, who was the more open racist, said that, well, we need I think a recount or something. So there were people who were saying to the civil rights activists that you all will throw the election to Bull Connor by what you're doing. I just wanted to.
That's so interesting.
right, because then,
I'm just gonna say it really fell down to like a very precise assessment of the situation.
Yes.
And there was like a lot of competing ways to understand like what is the right time to move, what are the different forces and where they are versus are they ready, are all these forces ready to act, or is it a very unideal time to wait? But
yeah, and so I think a lot of it is, or what's interesting is that then, I think the reason why I'm going into these details too is that I think today when we talk about King or the movement, not many people understand what actually happened in the movement and why we call King and these others a revolutionary corps, in the sense that it's really through us having, I think part of it is that some of us also don't know what had happened or what were the decisions that these leaders were making, what were the forces that they were coming up against, and how did they navigate those situations or strategize in those situations. And that's why I was hoping to share these different elements of the Birmingham movement, because there's just so much that goes into it that hopefully makes the case that it isn't just, you know, there's fire hoses and dogs, which there were in the Birmingham movement, or against the Birmingham movement, but that there is also these leaders who were engaging with the state itself, the national and local states, the leaders who had different strategies of how change would be brought about. There are also the different, capacity and morale of the people, because, or the capacity and the morale of these, like these are all such complicated factors, and they are reminiscent, or they remind us also of today, because sometimes today you think of all of these forces that are happening in the city. You know, what is Trump and the administration doing? What is happening in Philadelphia? Who are the other quote-unquote activist organizations? Where are the people? Like, these are all very complicated factors when you think about what is the strategy forward. And in studying Birmingham and studying the movement, and for us to better understand, I think shows us, one, that there is, or there have been revolutionary leaders who have taken on this task to understand all of these complicated factors and to mobilize the people and plan for or strategize a way forward. So with that, there's King, and then there's also Wyatt T. Walker. That, you know, I don't know, like, I don't think I was familiar with Wyatt T. Walker before the Free School, or even in the past several months. But Wyatt T. Walker essentially becomes one of the organizers of for the blueprint of what is going to happen in Birmingham.
Yes.
So with this revolutionary core of 11 individuals, who were being monitored at the time by the FBI as well, under J. Edgar Hoover. And the reason is that at this point, they're trying to there's the Montgomery bus boycotts that have happened, there have been the Freedom Rides, there's been also this communist threat that they're using against the civil rights or the Black freedom movement, to say individuals such as Jack O'Dell or Stanley Levinson are part of the Communist Party, and there's Communist Party infiltration, the Soviet Union is dictating the civil rights movement. And so this core in the movement is aware of being wiretapped. And so even as they're having, I think it was like a retreat, I forget in what city, and having a retreat to plan this out, they are vague about where exactly this is going to happen, because they wanted to, or didn't want to essentially arm the authorities of what the plan would be. So with Wyatt T. Walker, he puts together a blueprint, which he calls Project C. I forget what the C.
Confrontation.
Oh yeah, Project C for Project Confrontation. Wow. And so, I mean, you know, we're being serious. I'm trying to be serious in this, but also when you're reading it, these are human beings. These are human beings with different personalities and characters, and, you know, jokes between them. Like, King is saying to Abernathy, like, you are such a torture. If I end up in jail, I don't want to be next to you because you snore. You know, that's like there's the personality element to all of this, right? But there's Wyatt T. Walker, who essentially puts together a blueprint for what they think the approach to Birmingham can be. And so that also comes with 4 components. So there are the small-scale sit-ins, while they're trying to build strength in the communities through their mass meetings with the community. So that's 1. Then there's 2, the generalized boycott of downtown, where essentially with Easter, to not buy where you are not welcome, or Black folk are not welcome. 3 then are the mass marches to fill the jails, both local, state, and then 4th, to bring in also from Birmingham, but then outside of Birmingham as well, such as what is like the Bevels, the Diane Nashes, CORE, SNCC, into the city as well. And so that's where they set out, that's the plan, but essentially there's a plan, but then there's also then what happens as it hits the ground in Birmingham, because they're having come from Albany, they're planning, they're strategizing, but then even with Birmingham, what we come to know is that it's this massive uprising of the people. But the thing is that it also had taken time to mobilize the people in Birmingham to participate. Because one of the challenges is that, I guess we mentioned before, which is there are Black leaders within the city who are saying, like, why is King coming into the city, seeing him as an outsider, we can take care of our own business, we're working already with the state, there's a new administration, there's also the businesses who have learned, and they're they've learned of the movement, and some are not engaging essentially with these individuals or the individuals that are sitting in at the restaurants, wherever they're patronaging. There's not as much newspaper coverage when this first starts. Jails, it's like a couple dozen of people. And so with all this going on, I think there is a moment within this Birmingham movement where King is like, oh God, is this another Albany? Like, how are we gonna mobilize the people? He's also saying, when should I also go to jail? And seeing that as like, what is that strategic movement of, do I need to, whether it's fundraise, whether it's speak to various organizations and the people, or is the catalyst going to be me going to jail? And so there is a movement, there is a time in this movement where it's starting, but they're not getting the traction that they had hoped for. And so this is when King and Abernathy participate in a protest or a march, and they are essentially locked up for 8 days. In these 8 days, King is put in solitary confinement. There's little contact in the first couple of days, but then later he is writing and responding to the city of leaders that are saying, this won't work. We should just work with the state, the government itself. And this is when he writes his letter from a Birmingham jail. Then,
In response to,
yes, in response to essentially the white moderates and the black leaders who are saying, forget the mass movement. Let's work on this on a policy level, direct negotiating with the state itself.
and this, the letter from the, was it 8 white religious leaders appears in the Birmingham main newspaper. And what they're basically saying is what you said, that King is an outsider, that his agitation for his own personal purposes to build his own brand up, and people of Birmingham can handle this. We have a new administration coming in, and we can negotiate this. And it's what King in the letter calls the white moderate, which today we would call the white liberal. I'm sorry.
No. And so King also goes to jail on a moral principle too, because his father, for example, is telling him, like, you shouldn't go to jail. Like, he has been jailed before, the state has injunctions against him, all this stuff. But King is saying at this point, it's a moral choice for him too, and they will figure out a way, which eventually there is a way, because Harry Belafonte comes in and has raised sufficient bail bonds. But there is still that question of how do we sustain this movement forward? And what's happening in the background is that Lawson is working with these workshops, these nonviolent workshops, and they're not actually getting the participation of those who are older, like the stable working class. And what is happening instead is that teenagers from high school, but also elementary school students are starting to show up to these meetings. And that creates a question for King and the leadership, which is it responsible to have children in the movement, where they would be jailed, they would be harassed and beaten, and also that they're young and they would have records in terms of their academic records. And so that is also a question of, they face this new influx, but they're not sure what's the way forward. In those discussions then, essentially there are many conversations where young children are saying no, like telling their parents, no, this is something that I want to fight for. And even among the leadership, I forget if it was Shuttlesworth or one of this Revolutionary Corps, is that if they can join the church and make decisions about joining a church
And being baptized.
and being baptized and giving their life to a God, then they can also make the decision about going to jail for freedom.
That's great.
And so it's, yeah, and so it's really interesting as you're reading it, and like we're going through it more quickly than the Taylor Branch accounts are, but it's very interesting because the leaders themselves, going through the ups and downs of a movement, wins, losses, changes among the people, changes in media coverage, the state, whether it engages or not, the white moderates, all of these different forces, they see a breakthrough with these children. And Taylor Branch actually entitles that chapter, I think it's the children's miracle. It's a miracle that they had not anticipated, but happens. And so with that, there's this influx of children into the movement. And I guess I remember this number because I guess people volunteer to, like for these jail cards that they say they will participate in or have essentially signed on to being jailed. And so there were like 958 students, and then of it, like 60 were put on hold within these jails, or 600 were put on hold within these jails. And this number is important because it essentially overflows the capacity of these jails, and the administration is like, oh shoot, like what do we do with all these people? But this is where you see the successive marches, where you have these children that are facing these K9s that Connor calls in, they're facing these fire hoses, of children being fire hosed, of children having to go to the hospital. And amidst all of this, the parents are then also brought into the movement, and people who are watching, seeing children being beaten down, are then compelled morally to also participate. And with that, this is after a month after King writes the letter from Birmingham jail. And you see this national coverage. You see then the administration, the national administration, who is like, okay, we're just gonna write this out, not give it attention, then has to engage with it. And that's also part of what King calls creative tension. And I think the way we put it in Free School last time is that among people, how do you surface these contradictions that they have? Or surface the contradictions in society, a racist society where back then maybe not everyone is part of the KKK, but not everyone also feels morally compelled to fight for the freedom of Black folk. And so how do you create this tension that brings those contradictions to the surface? And seeing these children being beaten down, being hosed down, everyone is saying, how can we do this to children? But then there are also those who are saying that for the movement, for King, it's irresponsible for them to put children's lives in the stakes. But essentially, it brings all this attention, and then to the movement, and the administration is forced to engage with the revolutionary leaders to say, okay, what are the terms for negotiation? But this is seen as a victory for the movement. I mean, Birmingham is a place that Americans are for the most part aware of Birmingham because of the movement. And this also sets up where it's succeeding the Montgomery bus boycotts, the freedom rides, so forth. But this is in 1963, and it builds that momentum also for the March on Washington and for jobs, for freedom, equality. And that's part of the longer arc where the movement is trying to figure out where people are at, what is that next step, how do we achieve gains for the people? Because they also knew that following Albany, the people needed optimism or wins to feel that that there is the capacity for the people to continue to fight. But with that, if I missed anything.
Oh, it's hard to fill in after going after him.
Good job.
Yeah. I wanted to say, I think it's good that we continue to come back to Birmingham, and I feel that I really appreciated how you laid it out, and also how we in Free School Today, the question is, like, how did Martin Luther King go from civil rights to human rights to revolution, which is something I had to think about, but actually, I personally believe that, and I think others in the movement would assess this the same way, that there was the Black Freedom Movement before Birmingham, and then there's the Black Freedom Movement after Birmingham. And like that, I mean, that's what, I mean, the classic idea of what a turning point is, but I think one way you could see it is that organizations like the Southern Christian Leadership Convention, and then conference, and even Fred Shuttlesworth's organization, which was called the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights. They enter the movement using a certain framework or language, but really as they are going and developing and having to answer all these questions and operate at this very highly complex strategic level of working out this campaign and always having to ask themselves, like, will we actually, when victory was not guaranteed, morale was on the line, all of that, they come out of it in a higher stage of struggle, and I think they're able to understand what they're doing and use different language and just feel positioned for that next stage, which I think is really helpful when, since you brought up like the March on Washington and the, you know, the maturation of the movement as it goes along, which still ultimately is like, as we look at it, you know, from 1955 to 1968 is still a very short amount of time, but it did have, I think, various stages, and we can only imagine how much further it would have been able to mature if given the time and had King not been assassinated. And so I feel like what I'm working out, and I hope our conversation can also develop, is just what it means to catch up to that kind of thinking, rather than, I think, the way, I think, yeah, the Third American Revolution is described just as like a civil rights movement or just as a human rights movement, which, I mean, that was a component to it, but to call it a revolution and to fully understand what kind of thinking, what kind of leadership, what kind of understanding of nonviolence, understanding of the people and of strategy, and also the people's, yeah, like a movement for freedom in all those layers of complexity. Like, to be able to catch up to that, I think, is the task, and why I think we're looking so much at Birmingham. And so, yeah, I mean, I'll even say in regards to the question of the children's crusade in this, I mean, one thing to mention really briefly is that the reason why they even look towards starting with high school students and reaching out to like the sports team captains and like the prom queens of those high schools is because they didn't have in Birmingham the same number or of Black colleges that a city like Nashville would have had, like Fisk, Meharry, like Texas, or sorry, AME, or I forget. Tennessee, A&M. So the reason why they started with high school, they were at that point where they looked to high school students and younger children, was for that reason. Like, Birmingham was for that reason a little different than the other cities that they had been operating in. But then it was like the organic energy of even the children knowing that, like, you know, passing on the word about like this, the march at Kelly Ingram Park covertly, whether that was with their siblings or in school hallways, or even in their youth radio stations. So there was like an organic level, I think, of organization that I think was able to be deployed. And it was a very controversial decision. It was a question that could have actually turned the Black community against King, but in many ways, the children made a difference, but also even King said, I have gone to jail this many times, and yes. I believe that, I mean, your children are telling you that they are willing to sacrifice and go to jail for something that they believe in. What does that say, and what does that mean, and how do we take that seriously? And ironically, like, as there was such a strong campaign to, you know, smear King in so many ways as an outsider, as a troublemaker, as, an opportunist. Even the white opposition would try to say even they would also try to amplify this critique that King would use children in such an irresponsible way for his own gain. But those same people never spoke up when those children were beaten on the way to, attend school in Little Rock, Arkansas. So, even that is a way in which I think the hypocrisy of even white supremacy and being concerned for children, being concerned for Black children in certain instances when it benefits them or makes King look bad, I think also expose or further heightens the outrage towards the white supremacist order in a place like Birmingham. And so I want to emphasize that because I think nowadays there's always, the question of what it means for a movement to involve young people and the youth is on everyone's minds. And I think the question comes down to, is it just to fill a movement with young faces or fresh energy or even bring a certain kind of quality to a movement? Or is there something about the campaign in Birmingham that makes us really think about how difficult of a decision it is to actually involve children in a movement like this when the danger is so real and actually they had honest conversations about will those children be scarred for life or will those children carry the memory of all of this and experience this kind of violence or trauma in veils that we can't protect them from. Do we want to be the people who were responsible for that? And I think that it was a highly intentional decision that went through a lot of debate, and it really was because they had a really clear sense of that danger. But actually, it was because I think, that's why nonviolence in this really matters, because it wasn't just young people were told to go out into the street and kind of do whatever or disrupt, and that would, advance the movement in whatever way that would have done, but actually it was to win young people over to that nonviolent, disciplined strategy to be able to take, face those dogs, face police, and face white supremacists head on, and to go into jail with a certain kind of purpose and commitment that I think is actually a quality we should study more and better understand, because I'm not sure that is fully, something that we understand today. And I think it is actually a really important question for even the 21st century when we're thinking about what it means for a movement and what role children or young people should play in this. I also thought it was really important that, as you emphasized, there was actually so many levels at which the leadership of the Birmingham campaign was really thinking at this very hyper local level of Birmingham as a city, all these different players, the different levels of the white leadership, the businesses, Black folk, the different segments within Black folk, but also they were clearly thinking about the national stage with the Kennedy administration, the nation as a whole, where even Black folk were across the nation to be able to say leverage or connect with a Harry Belafonte in the north, or even what the response to children getting fire hosed and beaten and bitten by dogs on television is going to speak, how that's going to speak to Black folk even in a place like the urban north. And then and then the third dimension I think is very much that international world, that world dimension where it is the Cold War and it is a time in which even King says that it is very clear that the U.S. is concerned about its image. When things started happening down here, Mr. Kennedy got very disturbed. For Mr. Kennedy, he is battling for the minds and the hearts of men in Asia and Africa, some 1 billion men, and they aren't going to respect the United States of America if she deprives men and women of the basic rights of life because of the color of their skin. Mr. Kennedy knows that, and that the president's worries gave the movement leverage to change the reality of a segregated bastion like Birmingham, and that, you know, if you're able to touch the nerve connecting conscience and power, you can make a lot happen. And it's also what he echoes in even the letter from Birmingham jail, when King writes that, you know, very famous portion that I think we wanted to play at the King event, but we were a little cut for time in the revolutionary narrative, and so we might have revisited this also even after that. But he says, "We know that through painful experience, that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor, it must be demanded by the oppressed." I mean, very well quoted line at this point, but he also says, "Frankly, I've never engaged in a direct action movement that was well timed according to the timetable of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with a piercing familiarity. This wait has always meant never.
Yes.
It has been a tranquilizing pain medication, relieving the emotional stress for a moment, only to give birth to an ill-formed infant of frustration. We must come to see that with the distinguished jurist of yesterday, that justice too long delayed is justice denied. We have waited more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights." But this is a line that I think is really powerful, which is, "The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed towards a goal of political independence, and we still creep at horse and buggy pace towards gaining a cup of coffee at the lunch counter." So I think it's just really powerful that he's able to link these world movements for freedom against exploitation and colonialism on one hand to this long shadow of basically the betrayal of Reconstruction and the oppression of Black folk in the South, which I feel like is also what we were talking about in terms of like historical time and what it means to be able to, see, not just where history also is, and then also where not only the people are, but also where the world is moving towards. Actually back to what we were saying about the way in which Birmingham was not just a campaign for like a Southern movement or a movement in Alabama, but for Black folk as a whole in the country. After the campaign, King actually visits New York, and this, rally, that was one of the more triumphant moments where like the campaign was worn, and he actually brings on Jackie Robinson, who says, "I don't think you realize in New York that in Birmingham, what you mean to us up here, I don't think that white Americans understand what Birmingham means to all of us throughout the country," and that he was saying that his 3 children had wanted to come with him because they had seen Birmingham children going to jail for what they believed in. And so I feel like, I don't emphasize that because it's Jackie Robinson, I say that more so as a reflection of like what we were saying about what it meant to, like Black folk as a whole, and even like what it meant like for Black children to see Black children, and something that you've talked about, Black children taking a stand in the South against segregation, and what children in the North have been thinking and seeing themselves in that as well. I mean, in terms of questions for the lessons that we can learn for today in our moment of political crisis, I mean, I have just a couple, but there's a lot I think we could really get into. I mean, like that question of time and that question of the fierce urgency of now, and the reminder that we can't wait, which I think is true. Today, people are itching for a movement where they can channel their frustration and dissatisfaction into a nonviolent path for action, which I think King is rightfully in his letter from Birmingham jail says that was the only option available to them, having exhausted negotiation, every other course of action. And yet, however, the question for today is our leadership developed enough, our ideological preparation, the people ready enough? And so, if so, what would even that kind of strategy or confrontation look like that would be able to draw out those tensions of what King calls the negative piece of the absence of justice towards what he calls the positive piece, which is the presence of justice. And those are not questions I think have been clearly, that's what we're working so tirelessly to figure out. knowing and feeling that fierce urgency, and yet also recognizing like the necessity for that kind of assessment and working out of what that strategy would look like. And I mean, yesterday on our way to see this play, I was reminded as I was walking over that, yesterday was Nakba Day, which is the tragic anniversary of the forced displacement of Palestinians from their homeland by Zionists and Jews upon the founding of Israel. And there was a protest in Center City, and that protest probably amounted to no more than like one city block that, the police had cordoned off for them. And it's like, as positive of a sign it is that the American people are still not satisfied with the genocide in Gaza and dissatisfied with the war in Iran and the bombing of Lebanon. Like, what kind of, I guess, moral and revolutionary leadership and what kind of strategy and development of, people's consciousness and, ideologically would actually have to emerge to direct all these people who were there at that post, but also, all those people who weren't there, who are dissatisfied, towards like a real movement for peace, or towards a people's democracy, and a real challenge to empire and war, and be able to, take in the same level of, like knowing that even in Birmingham is a highly complex situation. I mean, today it's even more so. And so, I mean, that's what I'm curious about and want to ask and put forward for, ways that we can learn from Birmingham, but also know that, Emily, you're going to speak a little bit more towards SCLC at sort of like a later stage of also the movement's development as well.
Yeah, where you ended up with your presentation actually is also, I instinctively ended up in the same way, which is really nice, because I do think the reason why we're spending so much time to even talk about one specific campaign of the Black Freedom Movement is because I don't think it's well understood. Like, I think this is, in some ways, the past weeks or months of Free School has been us starting with James Lawson's demands that he put on us, which is that James Lawson's determination, even at his old age, that we don't understand the civil rights movement, the Black Freedom Movement. Like, we've only just scratched the surface. And to even talk about Birmingham in detail is, I think, so valuable. Like, just how complex the political strategy was, all the players. Like, literally the political navigation is astounding for a group of people who are not like professionals. Like, they are preachers, they are young people who've decided, I want to be part of change. Navigating, like you guys beautifully described, the federal level of government, the state level, the local level, the police, human beings, the Black community, the white community, elections, timing. I mean, just the sophistication of political navigation is pretty astounding. But yeah, it just reminded me of how James Lawson was basically like, if we're gonna ever have a fourth American Revolution, we're gonna have to actually understand scientifically the third American Revolution. And that's why I really appreciated us going into detail in Birmingham. And like, that's just one campaign. Like Alex was saying, that's just one campaign of like many campaigns that are 3 volumes, like legit, like 3,000 pages of Taylor Branch that we're like slowly trying to get through, like the small reading group. But what I wanted to add in is like, going off of Kathy, basically the thing that I think we were really trying to figure out after last week is taking Martin Luther King Jr., not even Lawson anymore, but going to King, this great revolutionary. I don't think we understand King actually totally as a revolutionary political actor. And when Doc and I were talking on the phone, just like trying to figure out, like last week I think left me with a lot of questions, which is, what makes King a revolutionary? No, actually, like when you distill it down, what was his proposal for revolutionary change? And yes, we've talked about a revolution of values, moral transformation of the American people. But what about the political transformation? Like how was King, especially at the end of his life, formulating that connection between the transformation of the people, but then the actual transformation of society itself? What is his proposal of seizing state power, or like achieving power? What was his understanding of power by the end of his life? Because like at the end of the day, all revolutionaries must contend with the question of power. Even Du Bois did. That was the whole point of Black Reconstruction, his understanding of Black Reconstruction as a seizing of state power. So in 1967, so the last 2 years of King's life, like this is me trying to answer James Lawson's call, like us trying to answer James Lawson's call of understanding the civil rights movement, the Black freedom movement, and King as a revolutionary. The last 2 years of King's life, oh, and also I want to say with Birmingham, James Lawson, like I really appreciate this about James Lawson. He does have these certain theoretical proposals that I think are valuable. James Lawson said the Montgomery bus boycott was a spark, a revolutionary spark, but the revolution itself did not start until Birmingham.
Yeah.
And I actually think that's true. And I think when you can see the arc, the civil rights decade, it's not 10 years of like, boom, Montgomery happened, it's a revolution now. Instead, the way you have to build, you don't know actually. You don't know if the people will take up the revolutionary movement. You don't know if this is just one blip, if Montgomery is one blip, or if we really have a movement that can be built across sections of the American people, all the people you need to like build towards something. Birmingham is when SCLC, the way Kathy and Alice described that revolutionary core, that is when a lot of things consolidated, like Alice said, to show we have a revolution now. And Letter from a Birmingham Jail is King announcing, if you thought this was a reform movement, it's not anymore. This is not about voting rights anymore. Well, Selma has happened, but this isn't about just like us trying to get the constitutional rights that we were promised that we don't have. Like this is a revolution now. If you're a moderate, if you are unhappy with this, then you don't understand what this is. Later, when King gives his Beyond Vietnam speech, that is when King is just a cold-blooded revolutionary, where he says, our enemy, let me be specific, our enemy is our government. Our government is the greatest purveyor of violence. We got a revolution now. And after his Beyond Vietnam speech, so I think that's very important to understand the civil rights decade, as Birmingham is a turning point, or you could see it as Lawson said, the beginning of a revolution, a people's revolution. If you see that as the beginning, then it kind of helps understand the rest of the arc. Selma and the Voting Rights Act, March on Washington, King's Beyond Vietnam speech, and then finally those last 2 pivotal years. After the Beyond Vietnam speech, Memphis, the Poor People's Campaign. This is a revolution taking off here. This is not a Southern campaign, this is a national demand. Oh yeah, the Chicago Freedom Movement. This is a national demand now. After King gives his Beyond Vietnam speech in 1967, the first planning meeting he has at the SCLC staff retreat. So every year, the SCLC does a staff retreat. A few times they would do planning meetings in different places. Of course, they're an organization. They would also do a staff retreat in Frogmore, which is the Sea Islands of the South Carolina coast. But in one of the planning meetings, and unfortunately the whole transcript is not completely published because King's papers, which I actually really think there should be a call for them to be released fully for the public, because most of them are not digitized, right? They're all at the King Center, they're in like many different places. Stanford has done digitized some of them, but a lot of them are at the King Center in Atlanta. And it's very sad because like, they should really just be completely accessible and digitized. But there's a portion of this speech, I think, and Kairos, which is like a nonprofit, they took some of the speech and published it, but I think they didn't have permission to publish the whole thing or something. So this is an internal planning transcript. King is talking to SCLC in 1967, this is May 1967, a few months after, I think 1 month after King gives his Beyond Vietnam speech. This huge speech, this dangerous speech, where he starts off his speech by saying, we have moved from the era of civil rights to the era of human rights. But he says more deeply, he says, now when we see that there must be a radical redistribution of economic and political power, then we see that for the last 12 years, we have been in a reform movement. We were seeking to reform certain conditions in the house of our nation because the nation wasn't living up to the very rules of the house that it has prescribed in the Constitution. But then, after Selma and the Voting Rights Bill, we moved into a new era, which must be an era of revolution. I think we must see the great distinction between a reform movement and a revolutionary movement. And this is King. Now we are called, like all this is King. Now we are called upon to raise some questions about the House itself. Now we are in a situation where we must ask the House to change its rules, because the rules themselves don't go far enough. In short, we have moved into an era where we are called upon to raise certain basic questions about the whole society. We are still called upon to give aid to the beggar who finds himself in misery and agony on life's highway. But one day we must ask the question of whether an edifice which produces beggars must not be restructured and refurbished. This is where we are now. Now this means a revolution of values and other things. And he says more about this, but that piece where he is acknowledging, it is self-reflection of what we have done so far as a reform movement, an important reform movement, a reform movement that has activated and mobilized the people, especially the vanguard of Black people. But we are now in an era of revolution. And it makes sense, right? It makes sense now why King, even in Beyond Vietnam, that is where he announces this idea of we are now in a time of a revolution of values. Like, it is a revolution. He doesn't say like a movement of values, but he's using the word revolution for a reason. Where he's saying we have to change, we're no longer just looking to change the rules of the House, we're looking to change the House itself. But I think this also helps us understand what King in the SCLC was trying to do, even by going to Chicago. That move in 1965, 1966, to be like, where this is not just a civil rights movement in the South, it's segregated South anymore. This is we're going to make this a national movement. We're moving to a higher stage of struggle with Chicago, the Chicago Freedom Movement, which they were never able to fully complete, the Poor People's Campaign, the stance against the war. This is a national movement. We're looking to restructure society itself, restructure the nation. We're looking to seize power. But also I wanted to talk about how, and this is, I think, really, I think, going off of Doc's demand on us. Like, and I've been kind of trying to make sense of this whole, like, I think last week we had a back and forth about seizing state power, achieving state power. But sometimes I spend most of my time just trying to understand, like, why is Doc suggesting this? Like, what is Doc really trying to say? Why is Doc interested in this? And actually, it really surprised me when you were like, oh, we really need to talk about seizing state power, Lawson's theory of seizing state power. And I was like, why? Like, why? I feel like we have it. Like, but I'm starting to realize why. I'm starting to realize what you're getting at, which is there has to be there is a urgent, imperative question of what was King's theory of power,
Yes.
right? And that I think is key. And so I spent some time trying to find where King talks about it. First off, I guess I'll start here. First off, in Where Do We Go From Here? Again, this is after his Vietnam speech. All of this, I'm telling you, all of this is coming after Vietnam. This is a pivotal moment for King as a revolution leader. These last 2 years are everything, are very, very important. This is what we're inheriting, which is why I think it's so important for us to theoretically understand. King, in Where Do We Go From Here? It's the published book, but the book itself is based upon speeches he's giving to the SCLC in 1967. He says, in addition, Negroes should be natural allies in many white reform and independent political groups, yet they are more commonly organized by old-line machine politicians. We will have to learn to refuse crumbs from the big city machines and steadfastly demand a fair share of the loaf. When the machine politicians demur, we must be prepared to act in unity and throw our support to such independent parties or reform wings of the major parties. Whatever. So the point I wanted to make was he's saying go beyond big city machines. The future of the deep structural...
Beyond the two-party system.
Yeah, beyond the two-party system. Oh wait, this isn't actually the right quote. Oh yeah. The future of the deep structural changes we seek will not be found in the decaying political machines. It lies in new alliances of Negroes, Puerto Ricans, labor, liberals, certain church and middle-class elements. Sorry, that actually wasn't the right quote I wanted to read. Sorry, guys. I didn't earmark the right place. It's okay. I should be able to find it. It's where I said, this is it. Yeah, okay, I didn't earmark it, but it's where he, oh wait, no, it's here, sorry. Okay, I'm sorry.
It's like preaching and you can't find your notes.
I know. He says, now another basic challenge is to discover how to organize our strength into economic and political power. No one can deny that the Negro is in dire need of this kind of legitimate power. Indeed, one of the great problems that the Negro confronts is his lack of power. From the old plantations of the South to the newer ghettos of the North, the Negro has been confined to a life of voicelessness and powerlessness. Stripped of the right to make decisions concerning his life and destiny, he has been subject to the authoritarian and sometimes whimsical decisions of the white power structure. The plantation and the ghetto were created by those who had power, both to confine those who had no power and to perpetuate their powerlessness. Now, the problem of transforming the ghetto, therefore, is a problem of power, a confrontation between the forces of power demanding change and the forces of power dedicated to the preserving of the status quo. Now, power properly understood is nothing but the ability to achieve purpose. It is the strength required to bring about social, political, and economic change. Now, a lot of us are preachers, and all of us have our moral convictions and concerns, and so often we have problems with power. There's nothing wrong with power if power is used correctly. You see, what happened is that some of our philosophers got off base. And one of the great problems of history is that the concepts of love and power have usually been contrasted as opposites, polar opposites, so that love is identified with a resignation of power, and power with a denial of love. It is this misinterpretation that caused the philosopher Nietzsche, who was a philosopher of the will to power, to reject the Christian concept of love. It was this same misinterpretation which induced Christian theologians to reject Nietzsche's philosophy of the will to power in the name of Christian idea of love. Now, we got to get this thing right. What is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and that love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. And injustice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love. And this is what we must see as we move on. And the other quote that I didn't earmark it in my book, but he also has this other place where he says, he does explicitly say, we've been just spontaneously experimenting in building a movement and building theory of politics and nonviolence, and its nonviolent direct action has been proven to be effective. But the thing that we have not been able to develop because we haven't had time is a theory of power. And he says it like that. He says, we haven't had time to actually develop a theory of how are we going to actually, with this revolutionary surge, achieve power. And I think that is the question that we inherit today. And the reason why I found this helpful is actually because, okay, one example is when you hear King talk about love and power, I think what he's also formulating is what we would call, what does it mean to have a whole people state? What does it mean to have a people state where the state acts, not just for the people, but acts out of love for the people? I think that we're trying to combine this moral imperative with the revolutionary imperative. Or how do you combine the moral impulse, the principled demand for love, that we see so much, that we get so much when we go to even Mother Bethel AME. I really see a lot in the United House of Prayer for All People. I was not raised a Christian, but I really resonate with Jesus in the certain ethic, Christ ethic. But it's not because I'm just interested in Jesus, it's because I see it in the concrete of what does it look like to produce a new society? What would it look like if the state was not anti-human, if the state did not assassinate the kings, the Lumumbas, if the state did not assassinate the Palestinians, but our government, our state is actually for the people of the people. That requires us to have a new concept of the state. And whether you want to go towards communist theory, whether you want to do a different synthesis, that is on the table for us. And the way I connect it is like, when I go to China, I have to say, the thing that, if you just spend time a week in a city like Beijing, what you will notice is, this is a society that loves its people. And I don't even find it that, for me, I don't find it that effective to even call it a communist state. It is a state that loves its people. Not just the children, but it loves old people and young people. The parks are clean because they love the people. There are cafeterias where you can buy a home-cooked meal for 5 cents because everyone deserves to have affordable meals. Like old people who can't cook for themselves, old people who can't go far. Like there's housing for the old, for the poor. There's jobs for everyone. It is a state that concretely loves its people. And you can shit on it all you want. You can shit on China all you want, but China has been able to love its people through the concrete of that, of the structures. And in some ways, when you hear King talk about power without love, is like, I forget the word. Power without love is bad, but love without power is sentimental and anemic. Like he's talking about what is a synthesis of love and power. That is what we are inheriting. We who see King as a revolutionary. But I also want to say, like, I ended up exactly with what Kathy said, because today, in some ways, I actually think when you understand Birmingham, or even the civil rights movement, the Black Freedom Movement, in some ways we're actually beyond a need to dramatize the injustice. Because in some ways, when you listen to the youth, like the Palestine protests, the encampments, when the college youth, when you listen to just ordinary people saying, I'm sick of the gun violence, when are we going to do something? Cheryl Parker is not solving anything, no elections solve anything. When you listen to even the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and Tucker Carlson's, we've been betrayed, we're tired of, when are we going to do something? What the sense you get is, people see the hypocrisy of democracy already. In some ways, we don't need, we have it already inherited, the dramatization of the hypocrisy of democracy of this country. And we're at a moment where, yes, we will always have to dramatize and raise these contradictions, but we're almost beyond that moment. We already, in some ways, the people have a certain consciousness that is in motion, but we're in need of leadership, and we're in need of a revolutionary strategy and leadership and the concrete of action. Like that's kind of what I think we're grappling with and why I get like very stressed out sometimes. Just check out these statistics. Like I think about healthcare so much because I work at a healthcare union, and like our members are losing their healthcare coverage because of the Medicaid cuts. It's just it's just really bad. Like I think sometimes for me, like I don't have to worry about that stuff. Like, but when the people I talk to, my union members, it is a concrete everyday stress. Like, and recent polls show that the two things that Americans are most worried about are not even food, but they're worried about healthcare and they're worried about gas. Because these are ordinary people who are also working. And they're not even worried about what am I going to eat at the end of the day. They're worried about how am I going to get to my job in order to earn the money to then go back home and have something to eat. And 64% of people are worried about healthcare, and 64% of people are worried about gas, more than like food even, or paying utilities or rent. Like they're not even thinking about that. They're like, how do I just like keep my job, get to my job? 44% of Americans find it difficult to afford healthcare. I mean, that's close to 50%. Like this is the reality. And I was connecting it to like, Alice and Kathy talking about children. Where are the children? Children have high consciousness. Children have a high capacity to act, to sacrifice, to want to sacrifice. I was really thinking about Luigi because Doc keeps bringing him up on like podcasts and stuff. But related to health, I mean, we're seeing signs, young people in particular, are exactly looking for the revolutionary strategies of power, of how to achieve power, how to actually not to transform society, but actually achieve power. And like those are the questions we need to answer for the youth, like along with the youth and for the youth, because in some ways you have to analyze or assess someone like Luigi as him attempting to contribute to power or doing something, which is the propaganda of the deed. But I've been like really moved by, like, I'm a big sucker for advertisements, to be honest. It's like I really am a sucker for storytelling. I don't know if you guys have seen, but there's a young white man running for Congress in Nebraska, not as a Democrat, not as a Republican, as an independent. And he was a reporter for The Intercept. And he had left his small town in Nebraska like years ago to become a reporter in DC. But last year, this is part of his ad, both of his parents worked on the meatpacking line for Tyson, because they still worked at these factories. Their jobs, they all got laid off, like, because all these companies are laying off workers. His father got diagnosed with cancer, and they couldn't afford, they were giving all their money, all their savings to cancer, that his mother, like, they lost their house to the bank, but she was so ashamed of, like, she didn't want to tell anyone that they were going to lose their home, especially with the father, like, still going through cancer treatments, that she killed herself. Whoa. And they found his mother with the eviction notice in her back pocket.
Damn.
And that's how they found. And he was saying, he was like, I'm running for Congress because I'm, like, genuine from his heart. He was like, I cannot see, he's running on an anti-monopoly, anti-corporate, and anti-war agenda. And it's not a performative thing. For him, it's him thinking the only way to do, like, all these, he's not the only one. Young people in different languages, in different expressions are trying to find a way to seize power, to achieve power. And, like, of course, this guy's like, okay, I'm gonna run for Congress as an independent. Will he win? I'm not sure, but it's not about that or not. It's about people expressing in different languages of, like, it is time, there's a moral hypocrisy of war, of unaffordability, all this stuff. People are seeking revolutionary strategies. People are seeking real strategies. And I was really moved by that. I mean, like, and then also, like, in Philly, you see all these marches happening. Young men, 50 and younger men, trying to do marches in different neighborhoods to stop the gun violence. There's been, like, a week after week movement. But I mean, there's no guarantee that a genuine grassroots movement of young men wanting to say, like, we need to do something, we need to change things, we need real strategies, not election. At any moment, all of this can be co-opted by politicians, co-opted by who knows who. And that's why I think we're in a moment of needing to understand King's theory of power and, and for me, I see it as, like, this, my assessment, and maybe I'm wrong, is just that I don't think we're at even 1955, 1963. We're not in that moment where the people need to be awoken, and that the people need to, that injustice needs to be dramatized or brought to the surface for people. I think people know. We're beyond that. We've inherited the Third American Revolution. We've inherited that dramatization already. I think these are all signs of that. But I think if I were to assess where we are now, like, we're in a moment in history where we must connect the latent consciousness, the arriving consciousness of the people, which I can see. I feel like I'm seeing it. This is why I listed those examples, to a real revolutionary strategy that shows that an alternative already does exist. It is an alternative civilization, it is an alternative method of being, an alternative method of governance that we call Black civilization, which I think we should better define and stuff. But we're showing that an alternative does already exist. And I feel like I didn't end in the most concrete way, but I kind of just wanted to connect, like, that's why I just think that's why the work that we're doing in Free School, in terms of this type of theory of actually studying the Third American Revolution, studying King's words, connecting it to the signs that we see all around us. That's why I think it's really important.
Well, I'm just so amazed by you all's presentations, and I guess Ike and John and probably Bertie would say the same thing. It's very interesting to see you all relive something that happened 60-some years ago, way before you were born, and how you all have taken this movement, that great time, and made it your own. And that is so, it's so beautiful to see, I'll tell you. Isn't it?
I agree.
Bertie, I wish your brother Boris were here to see it.
Yeah, he's,
But
very
we'll-
much
we'll-
amateur.
But we're gonna send a live stream to him. I want you to give me his phone number, because I want to personally send it to him.
Yeah, he's very much an amateur historian.
Yeah, yeah,
He enjoyed the meeting, by the way.
yeah, oh
Thought it
yeah,
was great.
I enjoyed him,
Inspiring.
yes. But, to see how you all embrace this and actually make it your own, and and everybody can see this is not just academic for you all. It's deeply existential, because I guess for you all, the future is tied up with this great movement and with our understanding of King. And I think it's a moral choice that you all have made, because in times like these, there's so many moral, quote, options. The option of not taking a moral position, and there's many ways that that's done. There are moral options to be on the wrong side of everything. The moral option to be indifferent, which King talked about. But just to see the way you all embrace King, and in a way that many people who lived through that period some time ago abandoned King. One of the things that, and you and I have talked about this on the phone, where in these last days of King's life, these last 2 years, sometimes they say the last 18 months of his life, where the staff of the SCLC had said to him, Martin, we've done enough.
Yeah, that's true.
Martin, you need to spend more time with your family. Martin, your children don't know you. Martin, let others take up this struggle. We've passed laws, we've changed the country legally. And King, which then makes him, we have to then see him as a revolutionary, insisted, I think as you bring out, that this was but the beginning. We now have to move to human rights, and our struggle must move from reform to revolution. And I think when Lawson was here, he was trying to still work out what that meant. And as we say, square the circle, complete the argument, to make real, by which I mean to bring to life what King was striving to achieve in his time. He would always use this, to make real what is written in the Constitution, to make real. I interpret that make real, to make live. And there's too much of the sense that King has died, the movement that he led has died, and for the most part, it failed to achieve freedom for us, as though that was a failure of King's. That was not a failure of King. He was assassinated just as he was about ready to lead the nation to this new stage. And I really, so I think for us now, and You know, basically, I have two starting points. I have the starting point of the Third American Revolution, and my other starting point is the crisis that we're now in. And I want to just say this over and over again. This is probably the greatest political crisis that the nation has faced. I don't think there's ever been a time when the American people have been so much against their own government as now.
Right, yeah.
In the time of King, and you listen to these speeches, you say, well, how could anyone not agree with King? Well, it was easy not to believe in King because the American dream promised to white America something that it has now been proven not to be able to fulfill. That was the promise to white people. Stay white. Don't listen to King. We, the ruling elite, will decide what black people get and when they get it. But you all remain loyal to the white supremacist state, and this is where the state comes in. And you will be able, each and every generation, to do better. That was the American dream. The state was committed to fulfilling or guaranteeing that dream. You know, one can only imagine the trauma and existential crisis of white America when it realizes that the American dream, even for them, is a fraud. For black people, that's not a problem. We never had it. You know, we never had it, never expected it. We fought for it, but we never got it. We wanted to live equal. We wanted the American dream to be real for us. In other words, that every generation, our children would do better than us, their children would do better than them, and there would be an upward trajectory of material benefit. For white people, the rug has been pulled out from under them. It never happened in the last 80 years. Never happened. And the fact of America's ability to provide for the material improvement for white America was a form of the propaganda of the deed. They didn't have to make the argument. The reality of white life was the propaganda that they needed. And of course you would sugarcoat it with Hollywood films and TV sitcoms and all of that type of thing. And the advertising industry with all of these beautiful cars that you can buy on credit and the suburbanization of white life and all of that. And so therefore it's easy to make the case. Everybody else is moving ahead, black people aren't, so that shows that black people are inferior. That black people culturally and other ways are inferior. It is not the system. But now we have reached a moment where no one can deny it is the system. We didn't have that at the time of the Civil Rights Movement. Although King was making the argument.
And Baldwin.
And of course Baldwin, yes. And we were just talking about the opera that we saw. You know, think about the political message of Raisin in the Sun or Blues for Mr. Charlie as compared to no message from what we saw. You know, although it was great and beautiful and great, you know, I don't want to take anything away from the performers. But I say all of that to say, and I think you brought up the Chinese state of the whole people. And this is what we must add to our arsenal of arguments. That state power must transfer hands. Power cannot remain in the hands of the tech corporate billionaires, the military-industrial complex, and managed by these opportunists lying morally degenerate politicians, including Trump, or in the forefront Trump. The case for the transfer of power has been made for us by the crisis of the regime. We just have to clarify what this is. But they have made the case. This war in Iran has made the case for the anti-war movement. The case has been made. You know what I'm saying? But I think to this we must add the concept of a new state, a state of the whole people that loves the people. And this is where I'm so happy the way you put this, Emily, to infuse into the discussion of the state the question of love.
Yeah.
And love among a people represents an elevated consciousness of the people. That's why King kept always saying, I'm not talking about some sentimental feeling. I am talking about a level of consciousness, a level of solidarity, a level of mutual humanity that must be concretized in the state. And I know last week, I think the word seizure, I don't know whether to use the word capture, I don't know what word to use, but some way, power of the state must be transferred from the billionaire class and the military to the people. This would constitute a new state, which we will call a state of the whole people, that is not just based upon law and constitutional rights, but based upon an organic relationship between people that we call love. The state will be an exemplar of love. It will model for the people what this looks like, because it will be the example of love for the people, and people will learn from that example how to love one another. You know? Now, the crisis is just that deep. We don't know from day to day whether the state can hold. And by that I mean, now we're not talking about something that's just a machine. We're talking about human beings. By the way, heavily populated at the elite level by intellectuals. Therefore anyone that trivializes the ideological struggle is trivializing the struggle against forces that have thrown this nation into war and poverty. In other words, we're talking about human beings that have ideologies, that promote ideas. You know what I'm saying? So if you absence yourself from that struggle, you're absencing yourself from the struggle against those very people that you say you're supposed to be against. You see what I'm saying? The state is held together based upon ideas. The modern state is a creation of ideological relations among human beings. What do we mean by ideological relations? By ideological, that relate the contestation of ideas, the relationships of ideas, of ideologies. In other words, let us say Robert Kagan, cold-blooded neocon war maker. There's no question about it. He admits this. He is now forced into an existential struggle over the war in Iran. He had to come out and say, it's already been lost. We got to get out of here if we are to hold the state together. Because it is a state whose primary objective is war and dominance of the world. Robert Kagan, Kagan. I don't want to keep going, but just think, this is what we're dealing with. So we are dealing with the great ideological struggle, but not the ideological struggle that took place in Russia in 1917. And we're not engaged in a struggle over who is right and who is wrong of the Russian Revolution of 1917. We're engaged in a specific and concrete struggle of ideas here over the question of democracy, peace, justice. Now, what is the concrete form of this? The concrete form, it's rooted in history. And it's rooted in the history of the American people. In its most elevated, really magnificent and beautiful form, the great Black freedom movement of the 50s and 60s. And who is the person without whom that movement could not have taken place? And that is Martin Luther King. That's why when you look at that Birmingham movement, you look at the whole civil rights movement, take King out of it, I don't think you have it. With King in it, you have it. Because, he's just a super genius who could articulate, in ways that it's never been done before or since, the desires and aspirations of the people. And white Americans who thought, I'll be indifferent, that doesn't concern, nothing concerns you until it does. Yeah. Now it's undeniable. Who do you turn to in this time of crisis? Thomas Jefferson? I don't think so. I don't think so. You have a living, breathing force, and that's Martin Luther King. A lot of people say, well, you're talking about Martin Luther King, well, what about Ella Baker? What about Fannie Lou? What about Diane Nash? By talking about Martin Luther King, you don't take nothing away from nobody else, and especially black women in the struggle. That was a false, distractive argument all the time. This idea, well, King was just another civil rights worker. He wasn't no better than Bayard Rustin or Ralph Abernathy or Shuttlesworth, and them will tell you right up front. I'm honored to be a follower of Dr. Martin Luther King. Yeah. Abernathy tell you that too. Diane Nash will tell you that. Coretta Scott King will tell you that. Coretta Scott King said, what manner of man is this? And she was married to him. And she was trying to figure him out. You understand? That's what Lawson, I was a very close associate of the man. And I'm still trying to figure him out in 2019. I still ain't got it right. And that is why, well, you get, I don't want to sound like a damn preacher. We're on target. I know, by the way, Emily, I'm a little bit, tell me how, my discussion of the state, how, that's a little, it's unclear what I'm getting at.
No, it's more that I'm unclear. I think I was unclear what it concretely meant.
See, the state, how could you define the state? And this is where the problem is. Oh, good, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, some context would be, I think sometimes the reason even why I was like, you're a Leninist is because I think you have a solid education in, for example, even in terms of my formal education, I don't have what I probably should to understand even what we mean by the state, or what are the existing theories of state power, seizing state power, why that not, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like even the way King talks about it is different, but I
Yeah.
think that isn't,
Yeah.
that's why sometimes I struggle with
Well, let me tell
understanding.
you something. I don't know of anywhere where there's a contemporary definition of the American state.
Yeah, interesting.
What you get the classical liberals, such as Thomas Hobbes, Machiavelli.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even say John Locke when it comes to the state.
Yeah, no.
Maybe Rousseau.
Okay.
So that's the classical, liberal, bourgeois definition of the state.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Then I think for the most part, a real discussion of the state doesn't begin to occur until you get to Hegel in his writings on rights, and then Marx. And from Marx, Lenin, where he talks about the seizure of state power, but if he defines the state, it is not a definition that fits the contemporary U.S. state. And we are dealing with something that is hard to wrap your head around or wrap your arms around. It's very complex, it's very fluid. There are many parts, many elements, human elements, ideological forces that compose it. And, you know, they have certain overarching consensus views, i.e. American hegemony, American empire. Okay, we all agree on that. You know what I'm saying? And you see that consensus. But then when it comes to the details of it, like how do we do it?
Yeah.
Or, you know, like after the collapse of the Soviet Union, a great triumphalism. Oh, wow, we brought them down. You ain't brought them down. They brought their damn self down, frankly, you know. By letting, well, I won't get, you heard my narrative on that. By letting themselves be infiltrated at the highest level by Western intelligence. And Gorbachev was an enemy of the Soviet state while being the head of it. But anyway, let me shut my mouth on that part. But no, it is a difficult thing to define. If we go to a state of the whole people, i.e. the Chinese type, it's easier to see what we're dealing with. You take away all of the bullshit, all of the propaganda, and you can see the state is an instrument of the uplift and betterment of humanity and the people. This one is all over the place. And that's going to be part of their undoing. You know, the inability to come to a consensus or an agreement about just how to do all that they claim they're supposed to be about. If this is supposed to be a democracy, why is economic and wealth income always widening? Why are the people always suffering? Why are the youth so you know, if this is all that, and they cannot figure out how to do it. But I understand, and frankly for myself, and because I don't have the competence to do it, I just have a general sense of what the state is. I don't know it in the ways that I would like to know it, but I do know its general function, its general architecture, and I do know that the alternative to it is a state of the whole people. You know, and I, you know, if I had my, if it were left up to me, it would be, as you, and building on King, that power must be combined with love, which means the state, which is the highest form of social power, must be combined with love. The state of the whole people is the state of the whole people because it loves the whole people. you know, not because it says in a constitution, you have the right to carry a gun, you have the right to get, you know, which is almost what King would call negative freedoms. Even though they call them rights, they are negative in that they are rights to protect the individual against the state. But yeah, but I think,
The perfect example of what you and Emily are saying about the state, Trump put it pretty bluntly, I'm sure everybody saw when they asked about his lack of concern for the American people, and he said, I have no concern in regards to the Iran war. It's unbelievable.
I think that's
one instance of him truly being honest.
yes.
And showing just how cold-blooded he is.
Well, you know, they say, who the gods would destroy, they first make mad.
Say again?
Whom the gods would destroy, they first make mad. So, you know, he is speaking truths. The ruling elite don't give a damn about the people. They want to win wars and control the world and its resources. And if it means that the people must suffer, so be it. And I think you're right about that.
That was lovely.
Yeah, it was a beautiful thing, a beautiful admission. And, you know, in his own ignorant way, he does tell the truth. That the other, yeah, he lies and then, okay. But, yeah, that's the way I would, but even if we don't know completely how to define the state, and I don't think that, go ahead, Alice.
No, it's interesting that you said that there's not a contemporary definition of the American state.
Right.
Because I would say, and I think not completely formulated, is I think it would be easier actually to define, for example, the Chinese state.
Yes, it is.
Because the Chinese state, for example, and it is, the state itself is a conglomeration of all of the, I feel like it's the conglomeration of the different forces that essentially embody the ideology that operates the society.
Yes.
And because, and I say it's easier in the Chinese state because in some ways the party is the party that has a single, that is united in its thought and relationship to the people is not so different.
Could I just interrupt you? I just want to say right on that point, the party and the state.
Yeah.
But there's another part, the government. The government is the management of the life, the political life of the nation. The state is the center of the aspirations of the people.
Wait, the state or the party?
No, the state. The party, this is where, you know, you can't compare, you can't say, well, it's not like the quote-unquote multi-party government or multi-party state that we have in, well, we got two, ain't no multi, or let's say that they have in France or England. They got but whether it's multi-party or one, they all turn out to be for the same thing because all politics is anchored to the state. So the government of China is a manifestation of the principles upon which state power is held by the people. By principles, I mean, and it's I agree with you, very simply, the power of the masses that is crystallized in the state, which the state, not the government, the state is managed by the party. You could have 1,000 different parties in government. But where does the state come down? And this is the moral imperative of the state. And therefore, increasingly, as I try to understand, in discussion with you, Al, the Communist Party of China. The Communist Party of China is the moral center of the Chinese people. Does that mean that every one of the 95 million members of the Communist Party of China is an upstanding moral person. No, it does not. But as a collective institution, at its best, the Communist Party of China operates as the moral force stabilizing and directing the state. The government, that is why, they always say, liberal kind of critics of the form of government and party relationships. Well, these government people, they always like to show you a clip of North Korea. Everybody vote the same. Well, why don't we vote the same? We voting for universal. You against that? Well, get the fuck out of the country then. Go to South Korea. Come to America and see what happens. But that kind of unanimity is only possible if the moral foundation of the state has already been established. Governing is then the day-to-day management of these moral principles. And that's why, I think, and I'm not saying it the best. I have to work on my own language about a lot of this. But this is why love is the highest principle of state power.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
And once that is the case, then you must go to a state of the whole people. If love is the guiding principle of state power or of power generally, if it is love, but in the ways that I'm defined, not as sentimental bosh, to use King's words, but as an active struggle to unite and elevate human beings as a whole. If that is the foundation of power and of state power, then the state is a form of the moral imperative. The party is a moral instrument of state power. Now, I'm not saying they've achieved it in China or anywhere else, but that is where we're going. And I think this is a case that we can make. And I think in this respect, we have squared the circle of King. This is what Winston was trying to get at. This is what Lawson's trying to get at. What do all of these principles of love, of all, especially the question of love. I know that was reading Lawson's autobiography. If I'm talking too much, shut me down. And I look forward, because I haven't you read the whole book, Kathy. I haven't. And if I might tell you, because I'm a little bit in a period of contesting his concept of love, and I don't think it is the same as the King concept. But this is the early part of the book, by the way. But I think when he was here, that's the thing, that love and power dynamic that King talked about. I think we got an argument.
Yeah. Can I read? Well, no. I want to, because actually the comments are, I think what you just said is actually really, I don't even have the language for it, but significant. I think you're right that we're getting somewhere. And a lot of the comments are about this too, so I just want to include them. Which is, Megna, well, first of all, a lot of the comments are agreeing, which is, Nathan Reddy says, quote unquote, the alternative of it is a state of the people, a state that loves the people. Wow, well said. We are getting there. Make it plain. Another commenter, Serenea, says, I agree with that. Same, Reddy. Vague terms to mean used differently in different contexts.
Say that again.
the state is usually, like, the state governance, like, those are vague terms to me and used differently in different contexts. So, like,
Yes.
people are enjoying that we're defining what we mean by
Yeah.
seizing the state power, why love, everything with king is related to this. Nathan says, we have to keep chipping at it, we're getting there, certainly. Injecting love with power and state makes it make more sense to me. And then Magna says, oh, maybe this is a different ready, because there's 63, sorry. Okay, yeah, sorry, I'm mixing up my readies. Magna says, Doc's education on the state is the classical and revolutionary knowledge denied to the people, which I would agree with. It's striking how Xi Jinping knew about the Thucydides trap.
Yeah, Thucydides.
Trap, while Trump's dumb delegation did not. So much of the current crisis is the dumbing down of America's intellectual class, even those in power.
Absolutely.
Oh, I wanted to say something actually, because I was just thinking about the Thucydides trap as well. So for context, this is the Xi Jinping and Trump, or the Trump delegation, U.S. delegation to China recently. And it was interesting because I don't know if you would characterize Xi Jinping this way as well, but he sort of reminds me of a philosopher king, and not in a bad way, because he often talks about when he was younger and working in the countryside, he's a voracious reader of books, of philosophy, of history, so forth. But it's really interesting because he is a contrast, where it's contrasted, for example, someone like Deng Xiaoping, where Xi Jinping is qualitatively new in that he is able to, how do I put it? Which is that, I don't know if it's a difference, or I don't know if Deng Xiaoping was not a philosopher king, but in some ways, Xi Jinping feels that way to me. I don't quite know how to make sense of it right now. But like even things of, like speaking of the civilizational state or the Thucydides trap, I think what he's laying out essentially is a vision for which the state and the government operate. Meaning, like when he says that the Thucydides trap, he's essentially referring to the tensions behind the U.S. and China. And what he's saying with the Thucydides trap is that rising nations and powers will ultimately end up in war with the status quo of great power, or like the existing powers. And the case that he's essentially making is that for China and then also for the world and the U.S. is that we don't have to move towards war. And he's essentially putting forward a mandate or not an option on the table for the people, which is for peace in a world that is driven by war, predominantly by the U.S. And the reason why I bring that forward is because in some ways, like I think listening to Xi Jinping helps me make sense of the gravity and weight of King. Because King is able to operate, when we call him the father of a new nation, or the father of the American people, a father of a new nation, he's able to operate at that level of great ideas of a nation.
This is very important.
And how people relate to one another and how states relate to one another as well.
How the people relate to one another and how the state relates to the people.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
And and I think like the way that Xi Jinping is a philosopher king sort of shows me how King is a philosopher king in some ways, of like the leader of a people that's putting forward a vision and ideas in which the people that reflect the people's aspirations, but also offer the people a path forward or direction forward. And I forget, it was just, I think just Megna's comment reminded me of the Thucydides trap.
Yeah, no, I think if I could just comment upon what you're saying, I think we have the opportunity to make all of this simple. not so obscurantist, which so much of the discussion of politics in the state and political theorizing is more obscurantist than clarifying. We can clarify the whole issue by presenting the alternative to the labyrinth that is the current state by talking about a form of state power that, or state power in a more simple way. Now, I agree, we can call it a civilization state, but definitely we're looking at a state of the whole people. And I agree with you that while the question of the state is a simple question, it's not all that complicated. The questions that are in the minds of the masses are complex because there are so many different ways of thinking about these things. You do need a political ideological anchor. And you're right about that. A head of state can't be a dummy like Trump. I mean, he just can't do it. He's incapable. Some ways you feel sorry for him. You're too dumb to be in the position you're in. And he goes over there, and by the way, if I could just, Xi Jinping and them were trying to give him a brief tour of Chinese civilization. I mean, what they're saying to, look, man, what you arguing against, that ain't what we got over here. We are a civilization of art and beauty and music and ideas. Just slow down. All that Cold War rhetoric and all, I'm using the street term rhetoric. You see what I'm saying? So Xi was like taking a child by the hand.
Yeah.
Look, see, this is what this means, and this is what this word in Chinese means.
This is a ceramic.
Huh?
This is a ceramic.
Yeah,
it's made from clay.
Yeah.
You bake it.
Yeah. And we did this 3,000 years ago. You know what I'm saying?
We invented copper.
Yeah. So we're not impressed of what we achieved at AI and robot. I mean, that's what we do. That's what he was doing. But I agree with you. But I agree with, something, and you got it right. I agree, Alice, that no one but this kind of genius, what you call a philosopher king, was capable of leading the nation the way King did. You had to have it like that. No more of this, you don't have to know, the leaders of the people don't have to know that much. All they have to be is a politician and be popular. Popularity and celebrity. But yes, I agree with that. I'm sorry if I talk too much.
Just to add to that point, as well as the point that you made earlier about Robert Kagan, I think the day after that, or the day after that, there was another interview which was done by this guy called Max Boot.
Oh boy.
Yeah, Max Boot is like an old school neocon. He wrote this article called The Case for American Empire back in 2001 after the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And in it, he kind of argued that the only way that America can fight against terrorism is by sort of owning its imperialist sort of identity. And major proponent of the Iraq War, and he recently sat down with this former CIA guy called John Culver. He's retired now, and they had an interview, and it was published in the Washington Post. And I think along a very similar line to the Robert Kagan article, what that article was trying to say is that China has surpassed the US in military dominance. And the major points over there were that the only choice that America has in the question about Taiwan is to flee. That they will not be able to sustain
You
against.
say Max Boot said this?
Yeah, Max Boot in interview with this guy.
Recently?
Recently, yeah, it was in the Washington Post. It was within like 48 hours of the Robert Kagan article as well. So here are like former neocons who were major proponents of America's intervention in the Middle East and wars of regime change, sitting down and saying that we have lost, the game is up, and America is no longer the military hegemon that it used to be. China dominates in every single military domain, and that a war surrounding Taiwan is not possible because America is not going to be able to hold its own. So yeah, within like 48 hours, these two people have come out with obituaries of the American, military dominance, and they're saying that China is actually far superior in it than them. So if we consider that, as well as the fact that China has a state that has managed to love its people and provide the institutional and societal support for its people, I think that it does show us the possibility that it is possible to have a military, be extremely militarily capable, and yet provide for your people, and yet have love for your people. And I think that it is, like, now that I'm trying to piece things together, it is this lack of love for the people in the American state, which has made it into a regime that boasts this really large military, that boasts this really aggressive capability, but it's unsustainable. At some point, it's going to be unsustainable. And for that, and like in thinking about this transformation, or you call this seizure of state power, I actually had a question, and I wanted to get everybody's opinion on this, because this is something I've been thinking about since last week's conversation, which is essentially, is a moral remaking of society necessary for the seizure of state power, or is the seizure of state power necessary to be achieved first in order to remake the society? Because when I think about the case of China, I think that they seized state power and then they sort of transformed society. But I'm sort of leaning towards, in the American case, that the moral transformation has to happen first before the seizure of state power, but I'm not sure. It's an open question for me, and I want to know what people think.
Well, I think that's such an, oh, sorry, no, sorry, go.
Well, I think that in the case of, Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement, when he says in that one speech, we didn't accomplish everything, but we abolished lynching. And that is a major moral revolution. But it didn't involve seizing state power. So I think that the two are mutually exclusive.
You think mutually exclusive or mutually inclusive?
Exclusive.
Why do you say exclusive?
I think that you could do I mean, to say that you could do either one, you could do a seizure of state power and not have a moral revolution. Like, when the Bolsheviks took state power, they took to putting the leaders of their state on their wall like they would Jesus Christ before the revolution. It was almost as if, Stalin or Lenin had replaced Jesus. I guess we could understand that as, they did not produce in the immediate revolution in seizing state power. They did not produce an immediate qualitative difference in the people. That came afterward.
Yeah.
And I would say actually World War II was this drive for peace was the real the sacrifice, the suffering was the real qualitative difference. That's two different, time periods. I would say the same thing with, I don't know, Cuba to say, but I don't think the seizing of state power is linked with the moral revolution. But the question becomes, well, what if you did link the two? I think that's what you're asking. What if you had a moral revolution? Just like there's the idea, Doc, that you introduced of a poly-crises. What if you had a poly-revolution where you have an industrial revolution, a political revolution, and a moral revolution all at the same time? Would be, quite a historical event. But I don't think you have to do both at the same time. And, if having a successful political revolution, maybe, well, I don't know, I don't want to be speculative. But the other thing I wanted to ask about, and this relates to the Chinese and Russian revolutions, was, Doc, when you were talking, I was thinking about this document by Mao Zedong called On a New Democracy, where Mao says, and I think this is after he seized power in 1940, and he says that the Chinese bourgeoisie are part of the people, and in a new democracy in China, they would be involved.
Absolutely.
And qualitatively, they're a force against imperialism because they are, and you see that today.
Can I just say something, just a small thing? See, I think Mao and the Chinese communists were always trying to advance the program of Sun Yat-sen. So when he talks about a new democracy, he's actually talking about the democratic revolution led by Sun Yat-sen, which was waylaid by Chiang Kai-shek and then the Japanese invasion. But I think, that's why the Chinese, let's say Mao in particular, but the Chinese communists were so favorable to the black movement and to Martin Luther King, whereas the Maoists in the United States were not favorable to Martin Luther King. The Maoists in China were, because they saw him as representative of a new democracy. And that's what the Chinese Revolution was, a democratic revolution, capturing the state for the specific purpose of creating a Chinese democracy along lines of Sun Yat-sen and Madame Sun Yat-sen. It's no accident that Madame Sun Yat-sen joins the Communist Party of China. Why? Because the same aims of her husband were being crystallized in the Communist Party of China. So different from what the Cold War propaganda has foisted upon us. As to the question, I think humanity since 1917, and really since 1949, is on a new level of consciousness. Not a complete level, but a great part of this new level of consciousness of the world's people can be traced back to the Black Freedom Movement and Martin Luther King. And King is, just like Mao dealing with the legacy of Sun Yat-sen, in some ways King is dealing with the legacy of Mahatma Gandhi. Yeah. Not complete, that's a big part of it. You know, satyagraha, how that is soul force, as they call it, how that is so central to the movement led by King.
Right, yeah. Or even Henry Winston, the labor struggles, the black democratic labor struggles.
Yeah.
Pick up satyagraha.
And I think had Winston had more time and more support, he would have, I mean, I think Winston was already following King. And he elevates King as the central revolutionary democratic force in the 20th century America. This is Henry Winston, who you would think would narrow things down to Marxist-Leninist categories. He is expanding things to really, to a worldview that looks more like Martin Luther King. And I think had he lived or had the time been more appropriate for it, he would have spoken just the way we have. You can see it in the book, you know, strategy.
Do you think, you know, Mao, because on New Democracy, you know, he talks about, you know, Chinese civilizational qualities and a new economy, obviously
Yes.
one that would involve, of course, basically what we see today.
Yes,
So, you know, what we see today isn't so far from his vision.
that's a good point.
And, you know, but for the, you know, for example, we know some hardcore Marxist-Leninists. Isn't Marxism-Leninism in a crisis itself? Aren't we?
Well, no question.
Aren't we suggesting, you know, that
Yes.
we're talking about a revolutionary science objectively beyond just the you know, the narrow confines
Absolutely.
of, you know, we're talking about India, we're talking about, you know, Haiti, all revolution. You know, Mao does it as well in the, you know, in his writing. He talks about, you know, other revolutions, not just communistic revolutions, but nationalistic revolutions
Yeah.
like Sun Yat-sen.
That's right.
But Kemal Ataturk after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire.
Or the Iranian Revolution of 1979.
Exactly. So you know, you talk about revolutionary science beyond you know, Marxism-Leninism.
and
But you're
that's
having Mao, a Marxist, talk about it,
Yes.
but a Chinese
Or even
Marxist.
Xi Jinping, a Marxist. Is he? You know,
Yeah.
it's a big question. You know, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
No,
cut
no,
you
no.
off, man.
I'm trying to figure it out. So he's
No.
a representative of a civilization. But what does that mean for the other countries that are not representative of civilizations like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and you know, South Korea or
Well, can I just, on that first point, it doesn't say anything bad about Marxism, Leninism, or anything bad about us to say that science forces thinking forward. You know, people try to make an argument, is China a capitalist or a socialist country? Well, that almost is a non-question. The question is the state. Does China have a society that has uplifted its people? Well, the economic means are just that, economic methods, economic means. The question, the primary question, and this is the way I read Marxism and Marx, starting with really the Communist Manifesto. Marxism and Marx and Engels were first and foremost fighters for democracy.
Yeah.
So when Mao talks about a new democracy, well, that's what Marx and them were talking about. Now, whether the struggle for democracy will be led by communists, socialists, or a new ideology, Du Boisian, let us say, or a fusion. Well, the question is, does it address the burning questions of humanity and of a society? And how successful is the leadership, the vanguard, in advancing humanity? I don't think anybody can question the success of the Chinese state. I mean, they've overachieved. You know, it's an overachievement. And they've left everybody else in the dust. So what do we call it? What, like I said, socialism with Chinese characteristics. Well, what is that? Well, we'll let you know when we figure. You know, just look at what we're doing. That's what it is. It's not a theoretical system. It is the practical life of a country and of a people.
Related to Shantanu's question, Reddy in the comments says, King did talk about a revolution of values. Basically, I think Reddy's saying that as much, I think the argument is that they're interrelated. To see state power and transform the people is related inherently. But actually, Meghna has an interesting question, which I've also thought about, which is, how do we then assess the governance of Harold Washington and Ron Dellums and others? Did they seize state power by winning elections through a movement, or were they held back by the lack of state power? 2 question marks. Yeah, Du Bois quotes Marx extensively in his letter to Lincoln, hoping that abolition will lead to democracy in America.
Du Bois quotes Marx in his letter to Lincoln.
I forget.
Lincoln was dead by the time.
No, I know, but it's I forget what document she's talking about. But I know what she's saying. It's hoping that abolition will lead to democracy in America for the working class.
Marx wrote a letter, right? To Lincoln.
Can you say that again?
Oh, yeah. Du Bois quotes Marx extensively in Marx's letter to Lincoln. Like, because this is from Black Reconstruction. Du Bois quotes Marx's letter to Lincoln, hoping that abolition will lead to democracy in America for the working class. But I think that's an interesting question, Doc. How would you assess Harold Washington and Ron Dellums and others? Did they seize state power by winning elections through a movement, or were they held back by a lack of state power?
Well, just in the same way that Bill Lucey and Henry Nicholas and Charlie Hayes and Addie Wyatt, all trade unionists, black trade unionists, saw the trade union movement as an extension of the civil rights movement. They did not trace their origins back to Eugene Debs. That didn't mean they didn't respect Eugene Debs. They traced their origins back to Martin Luther King. And I can say this about Nicholas because I knew him and he talked like this. The same thing with Dellums and Conyers. The difference between Dellums and Harold Washington, and let us say Hakeem Jeffries and Sherelle Parker, is that, take Sherelle. Sherelle traces her roots back to some other politicians. Harold Washington traces his evolution, his origins back to the Black Freedom Movement. You know what I'm saying? This Hakeem Jeffries, he doesn't trace his roots back to this struggle. So there is and this is where everything is important, the ideological shaping and framing of what they are doing, or explanation of what they're doing. For instance, Harold Washington, I'm certain, would say that what I am doing flows from Martin Luther King's movement for economic justice, or something like that. Henry Nicholas would say, organizing poor hospital workers is my doing what King proposed in the Poor People's March.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So they see themselves, Harold Washington and Nicholas and all these others, as part of an extension to the Black Freedom Movement. And I'm not making that up. Which meant that they saw what they were doing as an elevation an intensification of the struggle for full democracy. Sherelle Parker, I don't even think she would have that concept. I know Hakeem Jeffries is just pathetic, you know?
I have a question. Emily, you talked really great about the segments from Where Do We Go From Here? Kim's talking about the importance of building new alliances outside of the duopoly.
Yeah.
So I guess my very simple but complex question is like, what would King say about our situation today as far as building new alliances? And yeah, I guess I'm always like I find myself always going back to this idea of like getting more specific about what the state is, and I love this conversation between y'all about this. But like the descriptor of the state, right? And what I see a lot in my reading is like the liberal capitalist state. Like getting specific about, Doc, what you said, what are the principles on which state power is held?
That's right, that's what I was trying to make that, I'm sorry.
The principles, yeah, the principles on which state power.
And I was saying the moral principles when you get to the state of hope. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No. So I'm just really interested in, what are these kind of moral principles that are then undergirding the liberal capitalist state? And then it's like, right? And then it's
Very
like,
important.
and then, okay, and then so if we survey what's going on today, what's, like the people who are breaking with the liberal capitalist state, like there's a vast, like ideological spectrum with that, right? And so, I mean, I like the appreciation of these different ideological struggles that are pushing against the status quo, right? And I guess I'm talking about like MAGA stuff, right? Because I mean, there's lots of complexity there, but yeah, I would love for us to like have a clear kind of conception of, you know,
Can I just
like
say
what's
one
going
thing?
on in that.
Just a quick point, if you don't mind me. It just, you see, when we talk about the state of the whole people, morality is organic to or implicit in the project of state power. In bourgeois theory of the state, morality always comes external to the state. In other words, the church. You know, in other words, you know, like you take Immanuel Kant, he has his moral imperatives that could be concretized in the Ten Commandments. You know what I'm saying? So it is not inherent to state power that there be morality or moral imperative. But what we're talking about, and they call that democracy, you know, but what we're talking about is a state where morality is organic to and a part of the whole idea of the state.
Yeah, I understand, yeah, and it's funny how I brought up the morality question like 2 weeks ago, and I brought up the morality thing like 2 weeks ago, and I've like gone down some rabbit trails since then of like trying to fully, you know, more understand what is going on with this morality thing for me intellectually. But and so it's awesome how like just a simple like.
Or take the question of love.
Yeah. Yeah. But I guess my question was a little bit different from the morality piece. Like, I guess thinking about political strategy stuff, and it's like, what would King say about our current moment of the new alliances that are forming today? And like, I mean, like, how do we, I guess, how do we have a concept of MAGA as being, as like,
Make America great again.
yeah. Like I'm saying, like I'm trying to, like, if you think about MAGA as just like from a simplistic standpoint of struggling against the liberal capitalist state, right? In the sense of like people, like what people who voted for Trump, like are trying to express.
I think I would add to the ideologies of the state. White supremacy, when you look at the wars that it wages
Yeah, of course.
and the punishment of black people.
I think
And so that
liberal-
complicates
yeah.
like MAGA's relationship with the state. Are they not to
It does.
put not to
think
say
so.
what they're doing now, but I think that's part of it.
No, I think inherent within liberal capitalism is white supremacy.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess I'm just,
And to me, war is amoral. I mean, we're constantly waging war. Unless you're defending yourself against some enemy like Hitler, and of course, during World War II, he was supported by the United States for years and years. So, I mean, to me, war is amoral. So that in itself is against, love. And Make America Great Again excluded, that philosophy to me excluded all people of color. It was strictly for Europeans, white race. And you can't have a society based on, like Emily's talking about. I so admire the Chinese state loving their people. I wish that I could say the country I was born in loved my people. You can't just love a specific race of people. That's not love. That's missing the whole concept of love. That's racism. That's white supremacy.
yeah, I guess what I'm just trying to say is like, I'm interested in, I think I've heard y'all speak before about how, what has got us to this place, right, is the, right, we're getting closer to like the late stages of capitalism, right, in the sense of like the collapse of the society, right, the collapse of the principles that undergird the society. And so, in the sense of like, like just like the principles, right, this kind of, like the principles that have created the country.
Based on hypocrisy.
Yeah.
Everybody's equal and all. It was just all theory. It's all words, empty words. So you say principle, and I say, think of a principle, I mean something you live by. You just don't write it down and put it in the so-called Constitution.
So just any struggle against, like, the struggle against the hypocrisy, right? The struggle against the status quo. Isn't that worth us better understanding the origins of that?
What do you say, Tony? You're the expert.
I was enjoying listening to you all, man.
I can't, giving a fuller explanation of what she's asking, I think that might be a little bit over my head. You probably could, you could do it better.
See, the question of the state, the question of, take MAGA, Donald Trump sounded like he was challenging the warfare state, the state controlled by the neocons and like Shantu, the Max Boots and the, but he actually wasn't. And even, even the concept of Make America Great was always problematic.
I just mean people who voted for Trump.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was even problematic for them, as we're now finding out. But I know for myself, especially with 2016, if Trump wants to end these forever wars, then that will be a step forward given what had preceded it. And so, in some ways, it was an attack upon the warfare state. It is not a revolutionary state or a state of the whole people. It's just that he opposes these forever wars. Okay. And then in 2024, he runs, says, oh, I'm the peace candidate, I'm against war. Turns out he's for war, but I think the ball is so much in the court of the people now, and that's why the ideological clarity, not of all the people, but of enough, is such an important imperative.
Yeah. What I'm thinking trying to articulate is like within the white working class.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
I think many weeks ago, y'all were there's like this question of like the people want change, but something is holding them back.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The people want change, and there's kind of that a dialectic, I guess, between people want change, but there's something that's preventing it.
Yeah.
So so in that way, I mean, of course, that thing is like whiteness, right? That which is like preventing like this real change from happening, right? But I guess what I'm saying is we can't like recognizing that these people want change, want the system transformed, is something important, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they're seeing themselves squeezed out. Even before Trump was so squeezed out economically and everything, even before Trump, spit it all out a couple of days ago and said, no, I don't care about American finances in the least. I think white folks and they weren't doing, and people of color already knew decades ago that Trump was not for us. But I think the whites is being squeezed out economically. They're seeing just how false Trump's doctrine of making America great, just how, just empty it really is.
Well, can I just say about the MAGA movement and what Bertie you were saying about the principles? Because in 2016, when Trump was first elected, I was first joining Free School, and then I was also door knocking for AFL-CIO, and so I was talking to people on the ground. And I think that, to give a long arc of history, the NAFTA was signed by Bill Clinton in the end of the 90s, or maybe it was the early 2000s. I think maybe it was 2000. And NAFTA was basically a key piece of legislature for globalization. And globalization, sometimes I just want to say, when I say globalization, we should think deindustrialization, because all the jobs when Bill Clinton signed that were shipped overseas, and that's what's begun all this. But I want to link that to MAGA, because in the early 2000s there was the World Trade Organization protests in Seattle, and there were lots of anarchists who had a very big protest in Seattle. And that was the anti-globalization movement. That's what it looked like. It looked like Greenpeace, it looked like, radical anarchists and, leftists and that sort of thing. And, fast forward to 15 years later, 2016, the anti-globalization movement is the MAGA movement, and now it's a hardcore right-wing movement. And now if you're anti deindustrialization or globalization, you are a right winger, which is a very interesting flip. And then the left wingers are more for globalization. They're for immigration. They're for lowering, trade in the West. I want to say, and then the other things, fast forward to 2016, the MAGA movement was very different, and I would say it was very offensive to people of color. Like you had Trump saying,
It was never great
he
for us.
made fun of that because I was talking to people on the street and they're saying, yeah, he says offensive stuff. I'm not going to vote for him, but they weren't going to vote for anybody. No one was happy with their choices. Trump's he made fun of that disabled woman. That tape came out where he said grab them by the P word, and then and then there are fighting happening at his rallies. His rallies were dangerous, but he stomped Jeb Bush, and he stomped Hillary Clinton landslide style. It didn't even I guess it wasn't a landslide. She won the popular.
And all these juvenile comments about. But everybody, it was retarded.
But then you have to fast forward 8 years later. His coalition, his first term and his second term are very different. That's the main point I'm trying to point out. His first term, he had lots of generals, he had lots of drama, he had lots of leaks. His second term, he seems to have been, married to the neocons somehow and to Israel, and he seems to have decided to tie his legacy on that.
He's been deserted by a lot of intelligent people of all colors.
I think he picked that. But
this is his last term.
And this is his last term, and he's basically screwed it. So there's no real choice. Yeah, he's basically a lame duck even before the Iran war. But the last thing I wanted to say was I think that the principles in the American Constitution, they do apply to all people of all colors. There's an interesting article I was listening to on NPR where they're doing some research on Fort Mercer and the battle that took place there during the Revolutionary War. And the journalist was saying that you had Native Americans, freed slaves, and patriots fighting the British. And so you have to wonder what was going on, in their mind, that this, multiracial coalition was fighting,
This is I'm not familiar with that.
During the Revolutionary War. I'm not familiar with it either. No one's familiar with it because it hasn't been, researched. But this is Fort Mercer. I can look it up and send it to you. But it was it was on the radio, and it was Fort Mercer, and whatever is happening. That's in New Jersey.
Oh, New Jersey.
And so it's it's nearby a local issue. But I see the Revolutionary War more in the likeness of Martin Luther King, where it's a separation, from Europe.
And the oppression of England.
And the oppression of England, and a new hope for humanity.
There's a lot of good things about it. In principle, at least.
Yeah, if I could come back in, I'd like to continue the discussion we're having on King's program of power, which is to first understand how the state operates and its centers of power, and to then understand where do we fit in so that we may challenge the state and identify our power. And at least as I understand it right now, I think we've identified, for example, let's say the tech or military or media to be some strong centers of power that operate a bit differently than in King's time. Namely, it feels as though power has been of the state and has been multiplied with the power of technology, and in a sense has been further concentrated within fewer and fewer hands. So there's there's more power and there's less people in control of that power. And it feels like fewer workers matter than back then. Taking for example the War Machine. Now because of technology, you need fewer people to operate a war machine, or even in tech, you need fewer people to operate, I guess, these machines, fewer people to operate the computers, fewer people to operate the factories, and so when I guess, thinking about like how power lies, I don't want to come to the conclusion that ultimately there's like just a few intelligent people that operate this machinery on behalf of somebody, and that's like where the ultimate power lies. I guess then you would say, okay, then you're dependent on, let's say, the tech bros making a moral choice. That's a very low bar, and I'm not counting on it. I'm not betting my life on it. And I mean, I'm bringing this back to, let's say, comparing Lawson and the student movement to what we saw recently. You know, at least in our times, we have identified the university as a strong center of power and an instrument of the state. And I think, I think the students were intelligent to identify that importance of the university and to get a sense of the way they operated within it as being significant for the university. And what is like clear to me that is, and it sets an important mandate for now, for example, is that I don't feel that society was completely ready for their aspirations. Like the students like Diane Nash and others, like I think there was an organization, there was organization within society that was able to support them, their aspirations, like Lawson and those workshops. Whereas, as the little that I saw in the Penn and Kamens, I didn't see everything. The little organization I saw that was possible to join and reach aspirations was different organizations that basically wanted to use the students. To be honest, that's kind of what it felt like. More so than something like an SCLC that could be a vehicle for a higher level of struggle. And so, in like identifying the sources of our people's power right now to challenge the state and transform society, I do feel that what is a mandate for us is a like higher organization of like society on our terms, as opposed to the state's very high level and powerful level of organization of society.
Interesting. A higher organization of society, rather than a new state. Is that a way to put it?
I guess
I hate to interrupt you. I hope you don't mind.
No, maybe you're drawing a different conclusion.
Yes.
But I'll explore what I was going to say, which is I feel like a higher level of organization of society is required right now to be able to challenge the state, because I feel the state has become more sophisticated and society has become even more organized by the power of the state.
What would be an example of a higher level of
man.
organization? What would be an example of a higher level of organization?
Can I just? I think he's making a hell of a point.
I don't understand it.
If I can get it straight, because you are making, I think, a necessary division between the state and, let us say, civil society. This is very important. And your argument is, could I just say, are you saying then that civil society is more highly organized organically, as well as the state being more organized?
Maybe I'm feeling pessimistic. I feel like civil society is less organized than my impression of Kingstown.
Okay.
Given that my concrete...
This is interesting.
My concrete example of, there was an SELC to support the students that had, strivings to change society. And today, I did not see that there was a strong relationship.
Okay, let me ask you a question, if you don't mind. There's a sociological study going on in free schools.
Certainly.
Where they're looking at churches and mainly churches, right?
No.
Not mainly churches.
Eddie's part of the group that's doing deindustrialization and prison reform ministry.
You see what I'm saying? So, okay, let me go with the part that's doing Black Gods.
Okay.
Would y'all say that shows a diminution of organization, or more organization, or qualitatively different higher level of organization? I don't know, because that's a big big question that you put on the table. Is society, i.e. the people, are we more organized or less organized? And then the question becomes, just by what we're looking at here in Philadelphia, what do we see?
You know, I'm not seeing the depth of what you guys are saying, but I don't feel that church is broadly a part of people's life as I understood it to be before. I have very little knowledge of any significant labor unions, and the little ones that I see are weak and I would say even compromised. Like, I mean, at least in the city of Philadelphia, this trash workers, I thought that union leadership betrayed, I feel, the workers. My base impression.
You might be right, Eddie. You might be right. But I wouldn't jump to the conclusion. But I think you have put on the table one of the principles. This is why we're looking at these churches and black gods and so on and so forth. Can I just make a suggestion about that civil society?
Sure.
For instance, let us take the United House of Prayer for All People, Daddy Grace's movement. I remember back in the days they existed. I think they're more engaged. When I listened to the interview with Apostle Crawford, he seems to be more engaged with society than they were in the past. You know, I would say if you went back to the 60s. Take, for example, the Nation of Islam, first resurrection versus second resurrection. Is it less or more? You know what I'm saying?
That's where I might be wrong there, yeah.
Yeah. That might, okay, let's say maybe the exception. They're more than they were in first. But I have to ask Blaze, I mean, when you talk, I mean, because it seemed to me when I listened to that interview with Apostle Crawford, this was a man deeply concerned about the same thing. In fact, he was talking about King as the exemplar, yada, yada, yada. So, you know, I think this is something we really need to think more about. Take, for example, Mother Bethel. Okay, I can only go, let's say I go back 10 years with them. And now the new minister and all of this. Are they less or more involved? But I just...
Well, one thing in the 60s, and I was a kid then, there was more of a movement, you can't deny that, and there was more of an economic misery among people of color, especially black people. When you look at some of that, I was a kid during the 60s, you know, but you look at some of the old films of the 60s, the poverty was just so blatant and so ugly and so awful. That's why people like Fannie Lou Hamer think she picked cotton most of her adult life. Look at the intelligence of this woman, how wasted her condition was, maybe even most of the black people. They had that, what Du Bois called that talented kid, it was so small then. The black middle class, would you agree, Tony? It didn't evolve to, it wasn't big at all during the 60s. It evolved later, maybe 10 years later or 15 years later, the black middle class.
I can agree with you. But let me ask Eddie this question. Are students more engaged now than the 50s, let us say?
Are students more engaged?
Or even the 60s? And you know, I'm thinking about the student encampments.
I think less.
Huh? I think less.
I think less too.
Y'all think less?
Yeah.
They have more money.
To me, they are thinking about making money.
Yeah, I agree.
They're thinking about making money and the American dream. And that their commitment is to making money. That is their whole commitment. And not to the people. or a movement.
I kind of wonder how much of that is because of the absence of an organization like the SCLC. You know, like I was quite moved when Alex was talking about how, you know, in their planning, they also had to think about how to get enough money for bail bonds. You know, like their entire purpose was not to mobilize the people and then leave them there. You know, it was also to an extent to take responsibility for them after all the protests had happened. So I'm also, you know, wondering if the less involvement majority of people think is true, and I think also to an extent it is because they don't get the kind of institutional support that we had come to expect from the civil rights movement or the Black freedom movement.
Well, can I ask a question? Which is, I think there's a difference between measuring consciousness. There's a difference between measuring consciousness or even potentiality, potential, versus organization, like how involved someone actually applies how involved someone becomes in transforming society. Because, like, I would argue that, like, let's just take union, like, workers, who I'm most familiar with, the healthcare workers. I think the consciousness is high, and it's kind of getting at some of what Emily's asking of. More than the word alliance, I like the word realignment of the people. The people themselves realigning. Alliance assumes that you can neatly group different groups of people, like the Puerto Ricans, like the blacks, the whites, the Asians, versus realignment of the people in certain sociological groups or sections. But like, I think actually the potential for unity is higher right now among union members, but the organization is low. Like, in some ways, that's what Shantanu was trying to get at with, like, the organization is low, but maybe the consciousness or potential is high among young people. Like, there's dissatisfaction, like, there's no channels for them to go to, or they're misdirected. Yeah.
If I could speak on that, you know, I would take that, you know, to be the ideological relationships within society need further development. That's how I'm interpreting what you're saying. People's individual consciousness is low. You're saying their organization is low. So I feel that their the relationships that people have with each other ideologically is missing or low.
I think that all has to go together. I think that just as you put it.
My measurement of that, a little like, you know, sanity check. I was talking about this with Kathy earlier this week. Let's take the Million Man March. That to me was Minister Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam saying we want to make an intervention in the relationships within the black community. There's something gone missing, and they would point to, you know, the counter-revolution to say they have even fucked up our relationships because we're killing each other, and we need a holy day of atonement to try to reconfigure our ideological relationships to each other. I don't know how he would assess their consciousness then. Probably high.
Say it again. I don't know
how he would assess people's individual consciousness at that time. I would say probably high, but
Farrakhan.
Minister Farrakhan. But that need for active organization, bringing different facets of society, and particularly the black community. But, you know, to my understanding, anybody who is opposed to white supremacy, I want to come to you, and I want to organize together for this, starting with this one specific day, but even continuing right now. Let's say with the initiatives that they're having, starting that were because of the anniversary of the Million Man March. What is the initiative that they say, let's make our community a decent and safe place to live? I think they're on like their third meeting of that. They announced it when we went to mosque last weekend, and they're meeting in, you know, different community centers. That to me is saying that we want to try to build ideological relationships within facets of the black community. So that to me, in our words, I don't have their vocabulary, but in our words, I do feel like that is part of the like nonviolent struggle that is mounted, I would say, with your people, but not confronting the state, which is what I feel King was doing when he was mounting an ideological struggle, a non-violent struggle with black people and white people at that time to confront the color line, but not against the state as much as it was when it was confronting war in preparation.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I'm reading the situation as the Nation of Islam taking it on. I could be wrong, and what feels like part of the mandate right now.
It's such a difficult, I mean, I have to tell you, Eddie, you write in the throes of sociology.
Okay.
I hate to tell you that.
I could be wrong, but I could be right.
No,
I'm right in sociology.
you went into the wrong profession, brother. Your mind is more sociological. But that is precisely one of the big challenges or research areas in sociology. Civil society and how people are organizing themselves.
Yeah.
There was a famous book, sociological study that came out about 30 years ago, entitled, I don't know whether you heard about, Bowling Alone.
Oh, white sociology, yeah.
Yeah. Well, what he was showing is that increasingly as we got past, industrial age and all of that, the 50s, let us say, that white people were going more into themselves. Rather than being a part of a bowling team, you bowled alone. You know what I'm saying? Which would suggest social isolation and lack of social organization. And one would, and following upon what you said, that would also represent a lowering of consciousness, because we assume in sociology that people's awareness and consciousness is advanced in groups. I don't know. Just the two sides, as we say, two civilizations. On the black side, I don't know that you could write a book called Bowling Alone, because black people don't bowl alone. They tend to do things in groups. Somewhat. Now, I think this is a very important question. Let's look at black people. That's what we're looking at most closely. Okay, we say, well, they're not bowling alone. They're not living in suburbs for the most part. And they have a predisposition towards groups, churches, fraternities, other groups like that. I think one of the big questions, I think that you and Bertie are raising, the quality of it. Now, I think if we take specific groups, like you take the Nation of Islam, one could make the case, I think the Nation of Islam members would say, well, we're not what we were in the first resurrection. I heard that from y'all. They say it, and for the days when the messenger was alive, and the first resurrection, and when we were black.
What is the first resurrection referring to?
Yeah, the period up to 1975, when the Honorable Elijah Muhammad died.
Okay, prior to 75.
And then the second resurrection begins in 1979, more or less, when Farrakhan restores the Nation of Islam after, Elijah Muhammad's son had destroyed it. Okay. They call that the second resurrection. So their assessment of themselves is that they're not where they were in the first resurrection. I don't know how much I would say, but I think you raise a hell of a question, man. Are people, and you might, now I'm thinking about it, you might be right. You might be right. And then you think the other side of it, in comparison to white people who bowl alone, black people do not bowl alone, but they're not as involved as they were in their social organization, although the churches have survived.
Yeah.
You know, they just don't go away. Mother Bethel have problems paying the lights and everything else, as Reverend Kavanaugh said, but they're still there. The Nation of Islam is still here. The United House of Prayer, everybody says the same. Our people are not as involved as they should be. They're not coming to church, but we're still here. So I don't know how you, go ahead, but you go ahead, Eddie.
I think a substantial number of white folks, and we have them at the table, they can certainly, they're experts on what's going on. But I think a lot of white people don't bowl alone. They have sororities, they have parties, they have meetings. I don't know if I think that's part of their organizational strategy. I think that's, well, this is a book you said was 30 years old.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of their strategy to continue to stay on top. They're not, some of them are bowling alone. A lot of them are very organized, keeping us down. This is from my perspective.
If you look at Kensington, it's mostly young white people.
And Kensington, really?
Say that one more time.
If you look at Kensington, most of the people doing the
It's young white people.
folding is white people.
Oh, yeah.
I've gone there, I had a work assignment, and I saw a lot of that, like,
Folding.
zombie looking, a lot of them were white.
So, yeah, that's what we're saying, is what's going on with them.
It is a
Okay,
indicative of
yeah, it's so
social
complex to, even, it's to stereotype. I mean, you know, the white race is just as, Europeans are just as, diversified as we are. Maybe they're losing numbers, sure. I mean, that's what, all the people that counting up in censuses, they're losing numbers, but I think they're still very much organized.
Yeah. I don't think so. And what I said.
To stay on top takes organization.
I think that's one sociological study. That was the famous one.
You said it was 30 years ago.
Yeah. And I think he did an update, 30th anniversary,
Oh,
maybe 25th anniversary.
I like to read that. Bowling alone.
And he said we're still bowling alone.
Interesting time.
Well, it's 2:12.
Oh yeah, well we should go home and bowl alone.
That doesn't sound like much fun, but I'll try.
Well, but I do think that was an interesting. Eddie, you made it so interesting at the end. You should have made it interesting earlier.
Oh, thank you.
Interesting point.
I do think we should stop because it's 2:15.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of us have to bowl alone.
No, we're forming a bowling team.
Some of us have a work meeting at 2:30, so I gotta get going. But but thank you to all of our commenters. This was I thought we made a lot of progress actually around love and power in the state.
Yeah.
And then even like the sociology we brought in was, I think all of this, the questions that we have and some of the answers we're formulating are really important. But this is a good free school, and next week we look forward to continuing. And stay tuned for our sociological reports, which will be published in the next avant-garde issue.
Kathy, did you visit China? I know you was absent last week. Did you
No,
go?
I didn't go to